we're not going to waste, much time because we've got a very packed evening. So I will be calling on Efe Planch to give the Dem Ministries presentation, just to introduce you to, who we are, what we are about, and what we represent.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for your presence here today. We do not take it for granted at all. We are gathered here today to join women around the world in commemorating International Women's Day. And the theme, Press for Progress, couldn't have been more suitable to convey the spirit of the times we are in now. We are grateful to the African Women's Development Fund for believing in us in our toughest period yet. And I use yet very strategically, because for us as Dem Ministries, the journey has just begun. This event wouldn't be a reality without their support, ideologically, psychologically, and of course, financially. The context to this event, I believe, is proof of what can be possible when pioneers and pacesetters regard us as tools and potentials rather than competition. We are aware that many here today, and also tuned in online, may be encountering Dem Ministries for the first time, or that your knowledge about our movement may be a bit scanty. So permit me to use this opportunity to properly bridge any informational gaps in our representation. For in this era of ministries, many misrepresentations abound. So who are we? Dem Ministries is made up of a group of young, vibrant, well-accomplished, and passionate women who came together by virtue of social media. And we've decided to use the tools and the reach of social media to put gender on everybody's agenda. While this movement gathered momentum in the latter part of 2016, it was officially propelled by two incidents in 2017. A fracas by two seasoned male journalists, and a domestic issue regarding another seasoned female media personality and a husband. The two scenarios offered us the timely opportunity to flip gender narratives, to incite critical, radical, robust, and honest analysis and appreciation of gender stereotypes in our society. In the beginning, Pepe was our metaphor for truth. Raw, undiluted, unadulterated, not sugared, not pampered, and certainly not manufactured. We took on our normalized gender narratives by flipping the scripts and exposed the imbalances, double standards, and oftentimes self-destructive choices marketed to women and girls, which are oftentimes masked and wrapped in benevolent sexism. And this was a deliberate attempt to shake our system up out of complacency. Gender inequality and gender-based violence abound in our society, and we believe it is time to join existing interventions to confront them. As the movement caught on, we identified an opportunity to bridge an important gap in gender advocacy in our society, which is making connections between entrenched gender expectations and roles and the larger sociocultural issues impeding the advancement of women in society. So obviously, the FGM, the child marriages, underrepresentation in politics and leadership, and STEM fields. So we looked deeper into our culture and tradition and connected our agenda with home. Our logo is an Edinkra symbol called Meko. It's not a very popular one, and it simply means Pepe in English. Our elders use this symbol to represent inequality and uneven resources. The Meko Edinkra is sourced theoretically from and is shorthand for the Akan proverb, Meko Nina Empetumre. Forgive my chi. Meaning, all peppers, presumably on the same tree, do not ripen simultaneously. The implicit wisdom in this is that in life and society, there are those who are ahead. Dem Ministries recognizes that due to social engineering during the Bronze Age, structurally, social, political, economic, and cultural power are mainly in the hands of men. By adopting the Meko Edinkra, signifying inequality and uneven resources, our advocacy is situated contextually and culturally to advocate for balance in sharing whatever socio-economic, cultural, and political resources that are available. Our ultimate goal is that the female Pepe will eventually receive all the conditions and opportunities necessary for ripening in time too. In this light, may it go on record that we are not peppering men, but we are peppering our systems, governance structures, and our social narratives, and most importantly, to fall back on the potency of Pepe as a corrective measure in rewriting unwanted behaviors and outcome. Achievements, partnerships, and collaborations. So in the short span we've existed, our achievements exceed reasonable expectations. For instance, we've managed to revive gender discussions on every facet of our society, even beyond social media, radio, TV, even in our churches. I hear we've been having shout-outs from our pastors, so we'll take it like that. Social media groups, social groups off Facebook and other platforms, and even leisure sports. In the last 4 to 5 months, you cannot possibly have discussed feminism, gender advocacy, without thinking of Pepe. We take delight in all of this, positive or negative, because we realize that people are finally having the conversations needed to drive the movement forward. 2, we organized a meet and greet very early on, right at the beginning of our movement, and this was a gathering of our well-wishers and allies, and till date, many of the inputs we received from that event is the reason we are all here today, marking probably the most high-profile event on International Women's Day in Ghana today. We have spearheaded and dominated topical issues around gender, especially on sexual harassment and sexual abuse on many media platforms, the most prominent being the case of the 4-year-old in Asin Adadientem. Dem Ministries collaborated with other women's pressure groups to crowdsource funds which were donated to the girl and her family. We also sensitized women and girls and men in the area. We actually went to Asin Adadientem. We gathered the women, the men, and the children in the area, and we did a little outreach on consent and how to also prevent these cases from happening in the future. We collaborated with an organization called Yebetumi to organize a float called Walk a Mile in Her Shoes, which encouraged young men to walk literally in heels to symbolize their commitment to ending sexual harassment and rape culture. We also partnered with the CDD to use the Afrobarometer study on Ghanaian women's participation in the election process to inform our advocacy. Press for Progress. The ladies and male allies of Dem Ministries recognize the immense work that has taken place in the last 50 to 60 years, and we are grateful to be beneficiaries of these conversations. Nonetheless, this year's theme encourages us to keep the fight on and never to relent in our efforts to fight for our generation and generations unborn. We haven't arrived yet. Gender issues abound. Thank you very much for your time, and we do hope today will be worth your time.
Thank you very much, Efe Planch, for that brilliant presentation. We hope that, the people gathered here will be ambassadors for this movement now that you have, explained to us what Pepe stands for and all that. I shall now call on Jessica Horn to give us a goodwill message. Jessica is from AWDF, our funders for today's event.
So good afternoon, sisters and brothers. As mentioned, my name is Jessica Horn. I'm the Director of Programs at AWDF. And I know many of you are friends of AWDF, but for those who don't know so much about us, we were founded 17 years ago now by 3 African women who were very concerned that the conversations about one of the most crucial elements of making political agendas work, resources, were not being had with African women at the table making the decisions for ourselves. And so the fund was created in order to create that political mobilization, but also create a fund which would be situated within African women's organizing, so that we are a part of, we are sisters too, but we also resource, keeping a very close ear to the issues that African women are finding important at different times. So So we really make an effort to stay relevant, to stay connected, and to make sure that we leverage enough resources so that those resources can actually go to the things that we feel as African women in all our diversities across the African region we need. And so every year, we're a Pan-African fund. We have staff from all over the continent. AWDF staff, if you can raise your hand. So these are our sisters in arms. And so we're a Pan-African fund, but every year in Ghana, we organize an International Women's Day event. And we always do it in partnership because we understand that, again, movements are about relationships with people and with building each other's strength. And so this year, we partnered with Dem Ministries. It's an exciting contribution in terms of the discussions happening in Ghana around women's rights and around feminism. And we're very happy also that the context of this is a discussion that really is tracing the legacy of this tremendous effort towards women's rights and gender equality and feminist mobilization that exists in Ghana, because there is a tremendous legacy. We know that it was Independence Day on the 6th, and we know that in that context there's very scant mention of the role that women played in the liberation struggle and in independence itself. And every year I always remind people that the very Black Star flag of Ghana, which must be one of the most recognizable flags in the world, was designed by a woman, Theodosia Oko. And most people don't know that there were Hannah Kujo and many other people mobilizing in this country in the independence era. And so it wasn't only the victory of 6 men. And that is part of the work that we have to keep doing to make sure that we know that. I'm a Ugandan, so this is my history by Pan-African Association. And I will claim it, because we have to remember that these efforts of African women anywhere belong to us. They're part of a legacy of our work towards, ultimately, a liberation for all of us. So again, thank you very much for coming. And I don't want to delay us too much, but what I did want to do, I woke up this morning thinking of the words of Zimbabwean activist sister Isabella Matamba-Nadzo. And it's from a series that we produced for the African Feminist Forum called Know Your African Feminists. It's on YouTube. With the African Feminist Forum, which is a forum that AWDF supports and hosts, we realized early on that there was almost no documentation of African feminist discourse and action. And that was probably why people try to get away with this argument that feminism is not African, because we haven't done the greatest job at documenting it. And so we started in whatever ways we could to really try and document this. So the last initiative that we did is an interview series with 25 African feminists. It's the largest interview series of its kind that's ever been done. Some of the amazing trailblazers like Amina Mama, it was literally the 2nd ever video interview produced about her, which is a bit surprising given, again, her output in terms of academic thinking and feminism over the years. And so, again, it kind of puts another priority on the need to document. So this is Isabella Matamba-Nadzo from that video series. And this is what she says, speaking about African feminism and what it means to her. African feminism has given us a sense of citizenship. And I don't say that in the nationalist sense of coming from a nation state, but rather citizenship as being very much aware that we are daughters of this soil and that the soil belongs to us. And we have particular rights and entitlements, not as an act of benevolence or charity from governments or constitutions, but by a sacred process of belonging. So I hope all of you feel welcome. This is our space. It's our conversation. Again, it's the legacy of all of these tremendous people that you will hear speaking today, which is something that we very much honor and we thank you for, all of the effort and energy that you're putting into, again, the liberation of all of us. So I encourage you to enjoy, interact, and again, thank you to Pepperdem for curating such a fascinating set of discussions.
Okay, so next on the program is the keynote speech, which is going to be delivered by Professor Akosua Adumako Ampofo. Professor Akusia Adumako Ampofo set up the Center for Gender Studies and Advocacy at the University of Ghana, and she has been with NetRight, that's the Network for Women's Rights in Ghana. I shall now call upon Professor Akusia Adumako to come and give a speech notes address.
Thank you, Louis Carroll. One small correction before I start. I didn't set up the Center for Gender Studies and Advocacy. I was the first head of the center. So there were a number of people that set it up and talking about legacies. So good evening, everyone, and a big aiko to Dem Ministries and AWDF for putting this program together. This morning, a sister sent a message, original author unknown, on the NetRight platform that I want to share, slightly adapted by way of an International Women's Day message. She said, to strong women, may we know them, may we honor them, may we be them, may we raise them. I thought I'll hear people say amen or something. Let me also say how privileged I feel to have been entrusted with making what has been referred to as the keynote. I know that there are many people as competent or even more competent in this room to play that role. It is my prayer that you'll conclude that this trust was not misplaced. The task that I've given myself is simple: to provide a very brief and by no means exhaustive appraisal of the Ghanaian women's movement journey. This presentation is based on my research as well as the work of many stalwart colleagues, feminists, some of whom I'll mention as I go along, and some of whom are in this room today. Thus, it is important to recognize the intellectual work of cataloging and historicizing as important movement work that is carried out both inside and outside the academy, though I will not have time to go into this today. And then after that, we can get into the more exciting business, I think, of the intergenerational panels. I hope you'll find that the account today that I provide has a threefold value, maybe more. One, that we will recognize that our efforts today have precursors. Many times you hear conversations in political spaces, religious spaces, feminist spaces, as if what is being analyzed and propounded is a first. Today's conversation hopefully underscores that there have been many foremothers who have made possible the many spaces women can so freely inhabit today, including feminist spaces where young women can feel free to express themselves in revolutionary ways. It didn't just happen. My own journey has been built on the shoulders, of phenomenal women. Some I came to know and work with, and others that I simply read about and read their work. When women gathered at the Osu Castle in 1999, the seat of government, to demand that the state address the serial killings of women, and police and soldiers stood menacingly around us with guns, that has contributed to the space that millennials enjoy today without fear of the gun. Many of the laws around inheritance, spousal rights, girls' education, FGM, to name a few, as well as practices and institutions that exist in Ghana today, are as a direct result of these struggles. Two, I hope that this narrative today will bring us to acknowledge that we owe our foremothers a profound debt of gratitude. This is not to negate the work of young activists today, for movements have to be sustained and batons passed, but just to encourage reflection on, recognition of, and respect for our foremothers and their work. And three, I hope that this account will encourage us that there can be strategic battles that are successful and learn from others' methods. The fact that some things seem not to have changed doesn't mean there has been no progress. It means the struggling that we are engaged in is in the present continuous, even as we consider new strategies. So today we want to talk about women's movements, feminist movements, and I will not limit myself to the work that has been carried out purely feminist in nature. For the avoidance of ambiguity, I employ a broad definition of feminism today, namely ideologies and social movements that seek to achieve social, economic, and political equality for women, and that recognize the larger socioeconomic forces at play beyond individual female and male relations. Feminism's goal also includes undermining stereotypes and roles that restrict women. Women's activism has a long history in Africa and Ghana. As noted by Philomena Steady, women's collective activism in Africa is rooted in, quote, indigenous mechanisms of female mobilization and cooperation, the historical experiences of colonization, and the present reality of corporate globalization. Steady goes on to assert that as a result of their historical experiences, a large part of African women's collective efforts have prioritized social and human-centered goals rather than, quote, a narrow preoccupation with gender equity alone, emphasis mine. Thus, it is important to distinguish between movements that primarily seek to address issues of male dominance and those which seek to combat wider forms of political and social subordination to recognize the wider global forces at play. Women's collective activism today focuses on challenging exploitative development policies, advocating for more democratic institutions and peace, facilitating access to resources for poor and rural women, addressing reproductive rights, and promoting formal and informal education, to name but a few. Nonetheless, historically, Ghanaian women have mobilized around specific gender issues as well as broader human-centered issues. For example, Obing and Achampong, 2005, describe a very carefully planned strategy among an Asante chief's wives to protect their gender interests by subjecting him to menstrual taboos and thus successfully disempowering him. In the rest of this talk, I'll focus on the nation-state Ghana and some of the efforts in the years leading up to the creation and of our post-colonial nation. As we heard from Jessica, not many written accounts of Ghana's history pay tribute to women's roles in the nation's struggle for freedom, self-government, and democracy. And yet, Ghanaian women have a long history of political activism and participation in public life. And we might read the works of Edu, Ahin, Menu, and Chikata, to name just a few. Prior to Ghana's independence in 1957, women were involved in different stages of state building, tackling the intricate and yet very crucial aspects of the country's political struggles for independence, as well as other social and legal struggles. During the independence struggles, women organized cocoa hold-ups. They provided food for political activists at rallies throughout the country and were the foot soldiers who worked to recruit people to join the independence movement. Some, like Mabel Davdankwa and Ekuya Asabia Aisi, worked side by side with Kwame Nkrumah on the evening news, writing political pamphlets, demanding independence, and other activities that exposed them to the risk of arrest, and some even ended up in prison. For example, Letitia Kwei and Ekuya Asabia, and the elderly Edua Ankra, nicknamed Mrs. Nkrumah. Indeed, in his autobiography, Nkrumah himself notes, and I quote, "Much of the success of the CPP has been due to the efforts of the women members from the very beginning. They have been the chief field organizers. They have traveled through innumerable towns and villages in the role of propaganda secretaries and have been responsible for the most part in bringing about the solidarity and cohesion of the party." And Menu's work goes into this in greater detail. Between 1951 and 1960, a number of women's organizations were born. In 1951, the CPP Women's League was formed, charged with organizing rallies, dances, picnics, and the newly established Ghana Women's Day. And we might refer to the work of Mansa Pra. The Ghana Federation of Women was formed in 1953, largely as a welfare and social support group headed by Evelyn Amatefio, while the Women's League, headed by Hannah Kujo, was established with what might be read as a more feminist agenda. In 1960, the Women's League and the Ghana Federation of Women were merged to form the National Council of Ghana Women, NCGW, to replace the women's section of the CPP, and as the umbrella body under which all Ghanaian women were to be organized and to organize. Although the NCGW was not independent of government, it was an important locus of development and training for women as they organized rallies, built daycare centers, and sent younger members abroad to study. And here you might refer to the work of Chikata. And I'm citing these so that those who are interested in reading further would do so. I think it's important. We heard that things have not been catalogued, but I think if we dig a little deeper, we will find that many of these narratives, they may not abound, but they certainly are there, and I'd like you to look for them. At this point, let me throw in the names of some of the other women leaders around this time. Again, for deeper research, see the work of Beatrice Alamensa. Mabel Davdankwa was the first female member of the Legislative Assembly, as we heard, in the then Gold Coast, and and then became the first African woman elected to a national parliament. So first Ghana, first Africa. She was an avid writer who used her journalistic skills to challenge colonial supremacy and highlight women's rights, using a women's column in the West Africa newspaper. And you might see the work of Newell and Gajepo, Stephanie Newell and Audrey Gajepo. Susan Al-Hassan was Ghana's first woman Minister of State, Education and Social Welfare at various points in time, and the first African woman to hold a cabinet portfolio. She also served as the Member of Parliament for the Northern Region, albeit she was a beneficiary of the 1960 Representation of the People's Women's Members Act. Sophia Duku, an outstanding political activist and women's organizer of the CPP, also bears mention. And the aforementioned Hannah Kujo was an outstanding political activist and social worker in the First Republic. Kujo is credited as being the founder of the All African Women's League in 1960, a strong reflection of her role in the independence struggle. She also served as the party organizer and propaganda secretary of the Convention People's Party. After the 1966 coup that overthrew Nkrumah, Ghana suffered many political and economic setbacks that substantially eroded women's options for participation in the nation's socio-economic life. The period of changing military dictatorships were particularly hard, as women were frequently vilified and blamed for the nation's economic woes. Nonetheless, in 1975, the then military government under General Kutu Achampong established the National Council on Women in Development, NCWD, per NRCD Act 322. This was a state machinery coming out of the work of international women's conferences and the UN's work on the international place of women. Its role was, among other things, to advise the government on all matters relating to, quote, the full integration of women in national development at all levels, and to serve as the official national body for cooperating and liaising with national and international organizations on matters relating to the status of women. For many years, it had a core of well-qualified professional women running it. While the NCWD took its work advocating for women seriously, its fortunes were not always auspicious, and this has been well documented in a series on African women's machineries, Amina Mama and others, published by Third World Network. Successive governments played with its role and status, shifting it here and there. It suffered greatly during the Armed Forces Revolutionary Council, AFRC, in 1979, and the Provisional National Defense Council, PNDC, 1982 to 1992. Just a brief aside, during this time, market women were singled out as scapegoats and blamed for Ghana's moral decadence, as they were alleged to exploit client relationships with powerful men to amass undue profits. And I footnote this because it was also a space that women advocated around and complained about, and the NCWD was part of this. Later President Rawlings' wife, Nana Konadu Agyeman Rawlings, set up her own movement, the 31st December Women's Movement, and effectively clipped the wings of the NCWD by dissolving its governing council, setting up a management committee, and filling the latter with 31st December Women's Movement members. Thus, from the mid-1980s until the Rawlings government lost power to the MPP government in 2000, the Women's Front was being characterized by what Mansa Pra refers to as, quote, an illusion of activity. And I might add, an illusion of collective power, as state feminism and the First Lady syndrome, so aptly described by Amina Mama, took hold. Eventually, the NCWD became a department under the Ministry of Women and Children's Affairs, later the Ministry for Gender, Children and Social Protection. And if we have time in the discussion, we can go into the many women's groups' attempts to make the women's machineries in Ghana independent and to delink children and social protection from women. With a return to a more open form of government in 2000, civil society became alive again, seeking to actively engage with the state around issues of citizenship. And women have been an active part of this process. Two significant examples that provide an environment for coalition building, three that I'll mention are NetRight, who has already been mentioned, the Women's Manifesto Coalition, and the Domestic Violence Coalition. All three are networks of organizations that recognize that by working in collectives, we can be more effective at lobbying, advocating, and campaigning to bring gender perspectives to national processes in ways that individuals, groups of individuals, or even organizations cannot. NetRight's objectives include: 1, to work with and support the work of the national machinery on women's issues. 2, to provide a forum for sharing of ideas and information on issues, developments, and approaches to gender equality work, and to reduce duplication and fragmentation of efforts on similar concerns. 3, to strengthen and support NGO presence and participation in gender equality and women's rights in Ghana. And 4, to inject a human rights discourse to women's equality work in Ghana. NetRight has focused on economic justice advocacy, specifically on issues of how people's livelihoods are affected by government policy. Early on, a lot of work was done around the Ghana Poverty Reduction Strategy and the multi-donor budget support frameworks. And also land tenure reforms have been of interest to the work of NetRight. The network's review of the conception, process, and implementation of government economic policies exposed their flawed nature, such as a lack of sufficient interest in regional and urban rural differences in the experiences of poverty and their inherent gender biases. Initiated by Abantu for Development, the Women's Manifesto Coalition is a response to, quote, the insufficient attention given to critical issues affecting women generally, and also concern about the underrepresentation of women in politics, policy, and decision-making, unquote. And I believe you all have a copy of the Women's Manifesto with you this evening. Thus, the coalition has a very specific political agenda to make demands of the state, political parties, and civil society organizations for addressing them. The ensuing political document, the Women's Manifesto, provides these demands. And really, anyone who wants to do women's work in Ghana should read it. The following themes guide the manifesto: women's economic empowerment, women and land, women's social policy and development, women in politics, decision-making and public life, women, human rights and the law, discriminatory cultural practices, women in the media, women, conflict and peace, women with special needs. The document concludes by examining and making demands of institutions with a mandate to promote women's rights, such as the national machinery, currently our Ministry for Gender and Social Protection, the Commission on Human Rights and Administrative Justice, SHRAJ, the then Women and Juvenile Unit of the Police, WAJU, now DOFSU, as well as civil society institutions. The Domestic Violence Coalition, which, though addressing a more contentious political issue perhaps, built on the format of these earlier two networks, and indeed drew on their membership. I've chronicled the journey in a 2008 article of the passage of the domestic violence legislation into law, from early discussions by Lawa and FIDA in 1998 until the formal establishment of the Domestic Violence Secretariat in 2003. In that article, I list the major players, the journey, including controversies over marital rape and conflicts with the then MOAC minister, the Honorable Gladys Asma, that led to her replacement, I believe, or as a result of the activism of women in this room. One of my sisters is smiling at me. And the removal of the then IGP, who had the temerity to suggest, as a remedy to the serial killing of women, that we should watch how we dress and not stay out late at night. I also catalogue in that article the ways in which scholars, practitioners, and advocates collaborated to play our different roles. This network of scholars, activists, advocates, practitioners is very important in doing feminist work in this country. After almost 10 years of activism, the Domestic Violence Bill was passed into law. Change doesn't usually come easy. I'm aware that last month, the coalitions went to see the president and placed on the table again many of the issues that had fallen off the table, and he has promised to act. One of our areas of frustration is that we have a domestic violence law, and yet for so many years we don't see its implementation, and that has been a disappointment to many of us. A word on the African Feminist Forum initiated by the African Women's Development Fund. AWDF is in order. This is a more recent example of feminist mobilizing. The first forum, which brought together over 100 feminist activists from all over the region and the diaspora, took place in Accra from November 15 to 19, 2006. The forum adopted a charter of feminist principles that, in the words of the document, quote, sets out collective values that we hold as key to our work and to our lives as African feminists. It charts the change we wish to see in our communities and also how this change is to be achieved. In addition, it spells out our individual and collective responsibilities to the movement and to one another within the movement, unquote, AWDF 2006. Movement building was a key topic for the discussion at the forum, and local plans for action were designed, which led to Ghana holding her own National Feminist Forum in 2007, under the theme, Ghanaian Women Mobilizing for Change. Maybe in our plenaries, we may want to discuss why this initiative has not been as successful, as the work of the aforementioned coalitions. I'm almost done, so let me conclude with a few comments on Wither Tomorrow. In 2007, I asked the following question for a Ghana at 50 event. What kind of stories are going to be told about women during our 50th independence celebrations? Would the stories truly reflect our experiences as Ghanaian women? Will they reflect our quest within the women's movement for equity and social justice, or will they only project us as wives and mothers, as subordinates of an unquestioned male-dominated power system? These are some of the concerns that confront us as women in the celebration of our 50th anniversary. It is important for us to claim our space and provide an accurate picture of the situation of women in Ghana, with a view to moving forward towards a more equitable and socially relevant future for all women and men, unquote. The fact that we can ask the same question today, 10 years, 11 years later, doesn't mean that we have not moved. Think of it like HIV education. New generations are born. Socioeconomic circumstances wax and wane. The fact that we did HIV education seriously once upon a time doesn't mean we stop. The HIV virus, like patriarchy, will be with us as long as we are human. Ours is to always work towards change and to recognize that women are not homogeneous. We can be different, but still find common ground to work together strategically. We must not allow age, generation, class, ethnicity, educational and professional lives, marital and motherhood statuses, diverse abilities and disabilities to divide us. There's too much to do. Last week, cleaning out our store, I came across an essay I wrote for one of my architectural design brainstorming classes titled Women's Lib or Men's Rib. This must have been in 1979 or 1980. I was grappling with my newfound Christian faith and my newfound feminist identity, because what I was reading from adherents of both told me neither had space for such a mixing. At the time, I had not heard of, let alone met any feminist theologians. Today, I know many feminist Christians, even if some don't necessarily want the label. In our panels, I would like us to consider our goals as a movement or movements. Will we probe gender stereotypes and biases? Will we trigger conversations and assess and promote women's and girls' stories? Will we activate social change? And how shall we do this? What will it be in terms of our methods? We want to be strategic but also practical, as well as respectful and humble, as we default to inclusion rather than exclusion. How will we make use of scholars, the research, advocates, example, policymakers, and activists, civil society organizations, and etc.? How will we employ social media? How will each of us as individuals be the change graciously, wisely, and kindly? I am minded to reflect on the phrase, there but for the grace of God, go I. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Professor Adomako, a professor and gender activist from University of Ghana. Thank you so much for setting the tone. It's been very informative for me, and I hope, others have also learned here. We're going to go straight into our panels, plenary sessions. And, when Dem Ministries started, one thing that we've not taken for granted, one thing that we feel very grateful for is the quality of support that, we've enjoyed till today. And here in this room, we have very amazing people, amazing people who have supported us, high-profile people that, lend their support to us, lend their legitimacy to our cause, and we really do not take that for granted. So I am going to call on the moderator for the first panel, Ohineyere Gifty Auntie, a very known TV personality here in Ghana, who hosts The Standpoint on GTV, and she also works very hard for the girl child with her organization. Ohineyere, please come and take your seat. She's going to moderate the first session for us. And I'd like to call on Professor Techua Menu to also come join us, Professor Ekwia Opokwa Brichum, and Nana Oyelitha. You see, I told you, we were able to, International Women's Day, these are the women who get so busy attending so many events all over Ghana, but then they made the time to be here with us today, Dem Ministries. So we're so grateful to you. Professor Adomako Ampofo, shall you please come back and take your seat? If you're here today and you'd like to tweet PDM events, Press for Progress, if you're on Facebook, kindly, take pictures and make noise, virtual noise, for us. So thank you very much, and I shall hand over to Ohineyere, Dr. Gifty Auntie.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to see all of you once again. Today's our day, and it's really exciting that Dems and, of course, our good old AWDF has been able to bring all of us together once again. So we'll be referred to as the pace setters. In fact, when they started, they said the old generation. Then they refined it and said seniors, and now we are pace setters. Thank you very much. At least we are all going through the motions. It's a learning process, isn't it? We'll get there. Right, so let me start with you, Prof. How has your personal journey been like as a feminist?
Thank you very much, Gifty. Good afternoon, everybody, and a happy International Women's Day to all of you. What has been my personal journey? It's, I was reflecting on that, actually. I think it's part biographical, a lot by choice, and some by circumstance. Let me start with the biography. I remember growing up as a young girl and living in a patriarchal household. I became very aware of gender inequalities at a very early age. And I also took some decisions at a very early age. Oh yes. I think that by the time I was 12 or 13, I knew that I would be an independent woman, that I would never depend on a man. I read a lot. I was a voracious reader, and that also allowed me to really encounter other things, many people in my mind. When I first went to Wesley Girls, we did not have a library. We had a reading room. And I read everything. When I did not understand, I took a dictionary. So I was, precocious, you know. And then I think that the school also helped. The school environment helped. They encouraged us to be independent, critical thinkers. And then the teachers were really stimulating. I remember my French A-level classes, and we had a teacher, I will not mention the name, but he would set up these debates about whether women needed to get married, you know, jobs and things, you know. So by the time I got to university, I was already quite radical. I grew up during the Vietnam War, and because of the kind of school that we went to, all of these things were there. They were there with us. Vietnam was not far away. Vietnam was here. And then, of course, this was also the African liberation struggle, apartheid in South Africa, etc. So by the time I got to university in 1971, I became a member of the Pan-African Youth Movement. I joined political groups, and I was alert. I was assertive, you know, right from first year through university. I joined political groups. So the struggle, the broader struggle for African liberation, African unity, and the feminist struggle kind of interwove, because you also realize that as a woman, you were often alone. There were not too many women. And that even within the broader movement, there was also sexism, you know. So you had to struggle against all of that. So I hope I have answered your question.
Yes, you have. And I'm just wondering, Professor Brichu, when did you get actively involved in the feminism struggle?
When did I get, as Professor Menu had been talking, I've been thinking back, because then she provided some of the triggers, and I must say that I share quite a bit with her in terms of background. And I think that the home environment is really very important, because for me, my mother was the major breadwinner, and we all accepted it. And my father was not tortured by it, so we knew she set the pace. And having brothers before me also, they were the ones that were doing the cooking and everything. And so I found myself in primary school wanting to play more with boys than with girls, and suffering for it, but then still persisting. But the space in the secondary school was important. But for me, when I got to the university, there was a pace setter that really allowed me to give name to some of the questions that I've been asking myself, you know, because being in a girls' school, and I was in a girls' secondary school, we did everything for ourselves, including killing snakes. I mean, you couldn't, and changing bulbs and all that. And so the question about a woman and her abilities, really, we did not confront it. But we also grew up, of course, in a space that was socially conscious. And as Professor Menu was talking, for us it was apartheid, and having all manner of people coming to talk to us, and even having classmates who were on scholarship because they couldn't live in Zimbabwe, they couldn't live in South Africa, and telling us the experience and all that. So the environment was important. But when I entered university, I needed to give a name to what it is that I felt deep down in having to do something. Professor Menu was there. She had just come, and she had just taken an appointment as a research fellow at the Institute for African Studies, and got a few of us young women around her. So we used to meet in her room. Can I say where? We used to meet in her room at what was called Ford Foundation, and really her space was our space. And there were no hierarchies. I mean, we were freshers, and Well, when we wanted to be polite, we say Madam T, but we called her Techua. And I mean, she was a lecturer. Of course, her position as a research fellow. In the university, we have two kinds of people. People who are supposed to do more research than teaching, we call them research fellows. And people who are supposed to do more teaching than research, we call them lecturers. And in fact, there's more pressure on research fellows because they have to publish more. I'm saying this because then it tells you how far she has come. But she provided a space and she provided the literature. So we used to meet once a week. And,
sorry to cut you, Prof, but
yeah,
so
yeah.
I get the impression that you had a platform.
Yes, we did.
To start on.
Yes, we did.
Unlike others who just had to find themselves in the fray. Professor Tichwame was there?
Yes, she did. She did.
Okay.
She provided a platform, but yeah, and yeah.
I say that in those days, there were platforms in the universities,
okay.
You know. So I think it's changed now. Maybe there are platforms now. They tend to be more along political party lines. But in those days, there were broader platforms. Of course, there are political parties, there are religious ones now.
Yeah, we were also a part of a bigger platform. So then we met as women trying to interrogate deeper into feminism. And we had the literature that informed us. But we also had a bigger platform that was seeking towards broader social change. Because if you remember, ours was the time when we were fighting the most brutal military regime in Ghana. This was the Champon regime, and they would send the police to beat us, and we're there in the front line fighting in order to ensure that this unique government didn't come up. So the activism, I wouldn't say activism, the social change, what you call it, movement on the university campuses were really very strong.
Okay. Yeah. Now, I'm just wondering if I should start getting worried because I've heard Ebri girls, Wesley girls. Professor Akusi Adamako, please, which secondary school did you go? You also went to Ebri girls? Oh, Lord, have mercy, okay. So 2 Wesley girls, 2 Ebri girls, 1 Infantsman girls. I wonder if all sisters, right? But I'm just worried about the girls' school and the feminism and the very interesting. But Professor Akusi, did you understand what you were really doing when you decided to get actively involved in the feminism struggle? Did you understand what you wanted to achieve, what you were into?
Looking back, I don't think I did, but I knew that I was dissatisfied with the status quo, that things were not right and a lot of things were not fair. And I think when you are young, your sense of justice is very strong when you realize that things are not fair and that is based purely on your biology. You know, you become resentful and you have options to either get buried under it and say, okay, that's life, or to be part of changing it, conversations and then actually doing things. So no, I didn't know what it would mean, but I knew that whatever that animal was, I definitely wanted to be a part of it.
Now, still with you, and I'm just wondering, how did the status quo change? Because I was being schooled, just before I came up here, I was being schooled that traditionally there was nothing like housewives, and that men and women went to the farm together with their wives. So at what point did we become, you sit at home, let me go to work and come?
Yeah. I don't want us to romanticize our history and say that, once upon a time, before colonialism, everything was nice and dandy and men and women were equal. No, it was not so. But we do know that colonialism came to remove certain ways of life that were, for want of a better word, let me say complementary, in a way that didn't necessarily position us in a competitive way. But there was always a patriarchal notion that domestic work, women will have the prime role for it, at least in our society. This is not true everywhere. There are places where men, we know about the Akanda in the DRC, where men look after children, feed them, even carry them on their backs. So this notion that domestic women is not universal, although it is more prominent and I'm not. Let me underscore something, and I'm a person of faith, and I attend a church, although the church is not the thing. Your faith is a personal. Last year, I was having conversations with young women. Some considered themselves feminists, some did not, and I wanted them to talk to me about their journey. And I'm sure will not be surprising to many people, but a lot of what came out in those conversations, and they did say that many things were good for them, and they recognized that they were pace setters, but the religious spaces have become oppressive in a way that I didn't experience, when I first took on a Christian faith. And I was in a university where not everybody, espoused Christianity. Now it's like, if you don't say you're a Christian, there's something wrong with you. And in fact, one young woman's words ring in my mind. She says, even the churches have women's empowerment programs, but they are very oppressive. So I think that our religious spaces, unfortunately, have brought in new forms of domesticity and oppression, because we've got, quote unquote, men of God prescribing what a woman should be like, how she should dress, what she should do. If she doesn't know how to cook, she's not a proper woman. And I was horrified a year or two ago to learn from some graduate students of mine that there are women students who cook for their male colleagues. Now, I know when I was on campus, women sometimes cook for their boyfriends. But here are women cooking for men, and I mean, with whom they don't even have, should I even say they don't have a romantic or sexual relationship? I'm not saying that justifies a cooking agenda, but it probably makes it more understandable that you are in something together, so anyway. But here were women who were collecting chalk money whilst their male, yes, things have changed. Their male colleagues went to school, and they went to markets, and the guys came and they ate. And I'm like, what is going on? So in some ways, yes, some things have progressed. In other ways, because our society has made being in a relationship with a man like the highest thing you can achieve, people are subverting who they are to fit some model of a perfect woman that, in any case, is not possible. And that's very disturbing.
Very disturbing indeed. But listening to Professor Brichum talk about the fact that during a Champon time, they were at the front lines, and some of them, the soldiers were saying to come after them and so on and so forth. And to borrow somebody's word, you and I were not there. What has been your struggle? Some of the challenges that you have faced as you embarked on your journey?
The big struggle has been, who are you as a feminist? A married woman, a married African Ghanaian woman. How can you even talk about equality? How can you, a married woman, even say you are a feminist? It's like the word feminist is a dirty, dirty word. Feminism is for single and married women. So what frustrated women? So what are you doing, and how can you even say this? How can you sustain your marriage? This is not the place for you. And just the getting people to even understand what you're saying, getting people to appreciate the fact that it is a partnership. Women are independent. Women can stand on their own, and they are human beings and not second-class citizens. Because for me, I grew up with boys, and all the women I saw around me, like Prof, were independent, powerful matriarchs. Single women, more or less single women, who were looking after their families. Who spoke? My mother spoke her mind. Any day, any time. My grandmother spoke her mind. My paternal grandmother also. So this was how I grew up. So for you to be told that now you say you're a feminist, you are too aggressive, you are too assertive, and even you get, I remember I went to GBC for a program, and the security man at the gate, he asked a question and was questioning why I was going in, and I responded. And he was like, you are a woman. And I'm sure so many of us have heard that. But you are a woman. And I said, so what? I mean, I'm answering your question. So that has been a key challenge. People, men, especially men, and even women, challenging your identity. And challenging you just because you are being yourself. And you being frustrated by the cultural norms, the social norms, and the religious norms. Like, I go to court as a lawyer and argue a case, and the next thing the prosecutor is saying is that, so you have a husband, and he will take all this, you know. So that is a very key challenge, and sometimes it's like, do I just keep quiet and conform for peace sake, or should I be myself and suffer all the consequences?
And Professor Tichwameno, I'm sure this is something you've heard over the years. Women worried about how society will perceive them, how their husbands, their families, their in-laws will look at them if they should come out and declare that they are advocates. That let's forget about the word feminism. That's the demon word. So feminism or activist and be outspoken.
Well, I don't know that I've worried. I mean, it's not that I haven't confronted it. I'm aware of it. But as I say, we make choices, you know? We do have to make, yeah, my microphone is on. We do have to make choices. And yeah, you're crazy, you're one of them. Huh? That's what they say, one of them. In fact, I remember a friend of mine telling me that one of his friends was telling some young woman in Waterhall that you go on. Very soon you'll be like Tichwameno, nobody will want to marry you. So, I mean, it's like this time is a bogey woman. It's usually a bogey man. So I think that, but seriously, I think that Ghanaians have to decide. We are in the 21st century. We don't live on an island. You know, we are very selective what we want. So when we don't want something, it's foreign. When we want it, we can wear suits in this blazing sun and forget that that is also foreign. I think that we are in the 21st century. We have a president who is the gender advocate at the African Union. Let's pull them in, let them scream, but they will come in, you know, and it's interesting. Every man wants good things for their daughters, for their children. It's when it comes to wives and other women that they are a problem. So I must say I have never been concerned. I said at the beginning that I grew up in a patriarchal household, but I think that one of my greatest supporters was my father. He encouraged me to be anything I wanted, to study till I reached the sky. It was not a problem, you know? When I decided I was leaving my relationship, he just told my older sister to tell me that actually I had gotten quite a lot and I couldn't have everything. So, you know, so I have never been concerned. I'm not going to tell any young woman to try to conform, you know. I am aware of these issues and I try to offer support to people. But at some point you have to be true to yourself, you know, because you can fake it, you know. If you are in a relationship, it has to be supportive. It has to be nurturing. It has to be something that helps you to grow, not something that brings fear or makes you cringe. And I think that this is what we must be saying to our sisters, you know. If you have a partner, educate your partner. Let them understand, you know, where the world is going.
So do you pepper them or you sugar them or you pamper them? That's just by the way. You didn't hear me say that. Professor Kosia, would you say that some of the issues or challenges that confronted you in those years, you still see them persisting in these days? I mean, with our young ladies who have brought us here, with the help of the support of AWDF as well, I'm sure you follow them, you know what is going on. Would you say that the dynamics have changed or is the same old issues?
it's like a wave. It comes and goes. So you confront certain issues, you think, been there, done that, dealt with it, then you find another generation, dealing with them in new ways. I mean, I have been surprised at can I call it a cult of domesticity? I find it, I actually find in that area that I feel like we've gone backwards a bit, because as Tichwa said, we're in the 21st century. And some of the conversations I hear about women cooking, or I'm like, and you see, we live in an urban center. It's not like even you live in a rural area where, the pepper and tomatoes are behind your wall and you can go and pick them and cook your soup. We live in Accra, and some of those conversations are taking place in Accra, and you're like, seriously, it's like, there are maybe 48 hours in a day for a woman, but 24 for a man. So she can work some magic. And coming from people who've gone to school, and it's like, this one is not rocket science. So that's, I find more challenging, and perhaps because the millennials have shot ahead, at least the females, but many of the millennial guys are marking time. The gap between the sexes has widened, I think, and maybe when they have their panel, they will tell me if I'm wrong. What also seems not to have changed, and perhaps what is more positive about sexual harassment, and I know this sentence sounds like an oxymoron, but that younger women are, I think, many are more willing to expose it and to name it. I think in our generation, sometimes you didn't even know you were being sexually harassed. It was like, okay, this is how life is. You have to see how you navigate your way out of it, balance yourself out. And, I remember the first time that a senior of mine attempted to kiss me in his office. I mean, I was like, hey, Charlie, this man that I respect so much, how can I tell him he mustn't do this without offending him? And today, I think, you just give the man a slap and tell him, where do you think you're coming from? So that has, and this was somebody who was known to my parents, and I said, I can't spoil his image in front of my parents. I mean, to be fair to him, when I told him that this thing is ending now in a very polite way, he never, attempted again. But I think that probably there are more young women who are outspoken and will not tolerate this and will be willing to out you. But I'm just wondering, and we know that when it comes to sexual violence, we don't have the numbers. And so when we hear stories, it may just be more reporting than more incidents. But I seem to be hearing more stories of violence at the secondary and primary level. And I've been having conversations and reading a lot, and I'm wondering whether young men's addiction to porn is not, a part of it, because they are getting very unrealistic pictures about what sexual encounters should be like, and are being, fed some fables about what women purportedly want and how women like to be roughed and so on. And I think that is also, constructing new problematic areas that we didn't encounter before. But the workplace is still very male-dominated, or maybe not so much male-dominated as patriarchal in people's thinking about how women should behave, how they should dress, what they should do, what they shouldn't do. And that hasn't probably changed that much.
Now, I'll take this from Professor Brichum, and then after that, I think we'll have audience contribution and questions, and then after that, I'll come and take your conclusion on lessons learned. I'll have to come back to you before then, all right? Prof, looking back at your journey so far, when I say your journey, the pace-setters journey, yes, so far, is there anything you would have done differently?
Is there anything I would have done differently? Personally, I don't think so. I don't think that I would do anything differently because I must say that I have been lucky because then there were people ahead of me setting the pace and not having to deal with some of these things. Maybe I would say that one thing I would do differently would be that I would have insisted when a senior person who was recording my name when I assumed, when I had to register as a teacher, insisted that she was going to put my husband's name and not my father's name, I would have insisted that I didn't want to do it. But I think that if you allow me just a little bit of space, it might not come up and I just want to slot it in. We've made progress in a number of ways, but we really are also moving backwards, as others have said. And one of it is the projections that we have of women in the media and what messages are going to younger persons. So that even though in terms of thinking and outlook, what we have as Ghanaian women are very different from our realities, the movies that are coming up are undermining everything. And this is where the domesticity is coming from, because the movies are entrenching it. And maybe I would talk about what I wish in terms of my life, in terms of the future, that I would want to challenge the younger ones, especially those that are in theater, that we need new models of movies that project that kind of narratives we want to turn. Because whatever we do, if we have those films and everybody is watching them, it's dangerous, and they're telling novellas and all that. Really, they are setting the pace and they are undermining, because then they are bringing up images that we are confronting, but those images are coming back to those young girls, and that is how come they are not also very young people are getting raped, and they don't know how to, the self-protection, even though at a certain level there is. So I will talk more about wishes. But if I look back, if there's anything I want to do differently, I think that maybe I would have picked my battles differently, but I still think that I'm stronger even in the ways I picked my battles.
It's better than applause. And talking about, you know, where is General F.A. Mako of Wakanda and General Louisa Dongo of Wakanda? You know, Wakanda has come in, the Black Panther, I think, is doing magic for, you know, a lot of our young people. But Nanoye, you are like a bridge, though you are part of the pace setters. Yes, in the middle somehow. You were not there in the, you know what I'm talking about. Good. Okay, so would you say that your generation jumped into the fray and didn't really take your time to, I say, learn from the pace setters, the original pace setters, before?
No, I wouldn't say that. And it was, I don't know whether it was a deliberate process, but in the audience I have Mrs. Dorcas Kokapia and Professor Ikuya Kwenya. Because my activism started when I was introduced to the International Federation of Women Lawyers. And you got the Solomon sisters, who are also lawyers, actually introducing me and getting me to join the FIDA legal aid legal team. And so that was how it started. And the FIDA had a deliberate objective of using the law as female lawyers to educate the women in Ghana. So there was a lot of legal literacy, simplification of laws, of PNDC Law 111. We went around the length and breadth of Ghana, you name it, creating awareness, teaching, training, and what have you. And so at that time, it wasn't about gender empowerment. It was more about teaching the Ghanaian women to know their rights so that they could protect themselves. And that's why, like Prof is saying, we have come a long way in terms of there's a different dynamic. We've gone back, but at least we've come forward in terms of now people know the law and it is not an issue. But we got our older sisters, Professor Ekua Kwenya, Dr. Skokapia, and several others, Betty Modidrisu, to hold our hands within FIDA, because that was even a movement in itself. And I remember Auntie Dorcas, when we went for the march, you spoke about it in 1999. We marched from Kwame Nkrumah Circle to the Christianborg Castle, where President Rawlings was the president. And we demanded explanations. They refused to see us. The chief of staff was the one who saw us, Nana Atudazi. And we demanded explanation. Why were women in Ghana dying mysteriously? We have about 25 murders. And Auntie Dorcas, I don't know that you remember, you told me to get into the middle of the crowd because I think some men also had come and were asking of me. And Auntie Dorcas told me to get into the middle. So we had our older sisters and our older female activists protecting us, but then showing us the way. So it wasn't like we jumped into the fray. They were there to guide us.
I remember I had been in journalism for just 2 years, and I was asked to come and cover it. And as a reporter, I became an activist and joined it. When I got to the office, it was a different story altogether. Whether I was sent to report or to go and, agitate, it was a whole thing. But I think we'll invite questions and contributions. So we'll give 8 minutes to the audience. Okay. Yes, short, straight to the point.
Hello and good evening. Hello, Mami, good auntie. I'm Dufie, and I stand with women who cogitate and believe that gender disparity should be a thing of the past. I actually believe in that. But then I feel like of recent times, women have misconstrued what feminism should really stand for. They have given it a different meaning, which is cushioning the blow. Do you get what I'm saying? I feel like feminism should be something that every woman should uphold, because when we go to the workplace, to school, or whatsoever, what my male counterpart can do, I should be able to do, based on competence and not gender. But I don't think feminism means that when I go home, I shouldn't take my husband's surname, I shouldn't cook, I shouldn't do all manner of things. It's an infiltration of culture, and that's not what feminism stands for. I believe that, and I see a lot of people rolling their eyes.
Okay.
Because
I think we'll get your point, okay? Yeah. So please let somebody, so we can take as many people as possible. That's her view, and the panel will react to it, so please.
Yes, so I want women to know that at the end of the day, we should stand by what feminism means and push the agenda, not otherwise. Thank you.
All right, Oko.
Thank you very much. My name is Oko. I'm an activist. Thank you so much to the panel for giving us that rich history. And in that, I would want to know if there were men, even if they were not at the forefront, supporting you through the whole process. I want to know if there were men and what kind of ways did they help. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, Agnes Alote. I just wanted to...
Sorry, we didn't get your name.
Agnes Alote.
Okay.
I wanted to just support Dufie's point in the sense that the thing with feminism that I think some people react negatively to is that sometimes you feel like you're being pushed towards a certain image of a woman versus getting the freedom to define it for yourself. So I think that each woman should define what it means to be herself and do that. If that means wearing pink and twirling, so be it. If that means flying a fighter jet, so be it. So even as Dufie was speaking, some people were laughing at her. And that's the problem. We need to support each other, even if we don't agree.
Thank you. The lady in TV Africa t-shirt.
My name is Christiana Ifanyako, TV Africa. Mine is a question. What is the difference between equality and equity? And with the feminism ideology, are you fighting for equality, or you want to be? I just need a clear definition on that.
Point.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. There's a lady in there.
Hello. Good evening. My name is Joyce Jidete, and I teach at the SOSM and Minor International College. I teach cultural anthropology, so gender and women's issues are something we discuss in class all the time. And just this afternoon, I was trying to enlighten a male colleague of mine, about what feminism truly stands for, at least in my point of view. And for me, I think it's simply getting to the point in the world where women's rights are recognized as human rights. That is how I understand feminism. And based on that, one of the comments he had made, which I would want to pass on to you in the form of a question, is he thought that the original feminism stood for something like what I explained just a couple of seconds ago. But he thinks feminism has evolved into something more of man-hating, frenzied, bitter, frustrated women who think female superiority should be a thing. I think it's more of women equality. I mean, female superiority, no.
All right.
So how do you understand?
Thank you very much. I think you can take a picture of the 5 of us here and show him. If we look frustrated, depressed, or bitter. Anybody else? Any more questions or contribution? The two who like to confuse me. One of the forces, yes.
My name is
twins.
Utopia, and I have a question. It was basically, how do you help someone understand what feminism is? Because I have a lot of boys in my year who if I'm asked a question, I say I'm a feminist, and they all of a sudden have this weird reaction. And I want to get them to understand that there's nothing wrong with being a feminist, and just because I am a feminist doesn't mean I don't like you or I hate you for any reason.
All right. Thank you very much. Ms. Fossing. And then after her, one more, and then we're done. Okay.
Hello, my name is Francisca Kakra-Fossen. I've had the pleasure of interviewing 3 ladies towards the left, from Gifty, yourself included. The 2 professors, I haven't met them, but I must say that it was very thrilling for me to hear them talk about feminism, their personal journeys, and how long they've come. Let me just go straight to the point. I just wanted to ask, it appears that we're in a time where we are talking about women's issues, good or bad, we're talking about it. What does it mean for feminism when it appears that there are 2 streams of thought? There seems to be some confusion, for want of a better word, among women. Some think that feminists hate men. Others think that let's keep the traditional roles of women, and that means that we do not hate men, etc. They both have, what they believe in. Right. But what does the discord that we are seeing mean for the fight?
Okay. All right. Yes, the ladies is standing behind.
Hello, my name is Flossie Azu, and mine is more of a question, really. I'm asking for a comment from you, and I'm sure, being pace setters, there's a lot of ground that you've broken. There's a lot of things that you've done with the pushback that you had during your prime and all that. But is there something that this generation is doing or that is happening now that has made incredible strides in the fight for women's rights and in feminism that you thought was unimaginable when you first started out?
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. I know, more hands, but unfortunately, because of time, you have the opportunity to ask a question during the next panel. But Professor Akosia, what are you looking for? Equity or equality?
Can I start from the feminist thing? And I'll get to the equity or equality. And I know that if I don't, by the time it gets to the end of the line, everything would have been sorted. There are different kinds of feminists and feminisms. And somebody said there isn't, women should feel free to be what they want to be. I think that's part of the equality, that you want to be able to be who you want to be. Techua has said several times, I don't know if this is still true, that cooking relaxes her.
Yeah, but not for her.
So... the point that I wanted to make is, if somebody wants to cook or likes to cook, she should feel free to do the cooking when she wants to and how she wants to and for who she wants to, but it shouldn't be put on her. If another woman also doesn't want to cook, she should feel free. If she wants to be called Abusia Brefi or Abusia Mansa, and that's the name she wants, that should be her choice. The problem is when there is a box, and this is what a woman must look like, and if she's not in that box, then she's not a proper woman. That is the issue. That's the issue. So there isn't one kind of feminist. So when I hear there used to be a kind of feminism, but these days feminism is about hating men, there isn't one feminism. We are saying feminism, very briefly, and I tried to allude to that in my talk, is really about having the freedom. Yes, women's rights are human rights. And having the freedom to be who you want to be, to live in an environment where if you want to go into politics, you are allowed to do so. If you want to go into film, you can do so. How you want to dress, who you want to be with, just like any other human being on the earth, you want that space to be who you want to be. So, for me, that is what it is, plain and simple. And so we shouldn't be restricted in our roles. And yeah, if you want to call yourself Mrs., please, feel free to call yourself Mrs. But don't insist that if somebody is married and she's not Mrs., then she's not properly married. In any case, that title Mrs., the British brought it to us. So if you want it and I don't want it, there was a question about, so equality is about having the space as everybody else has the space and to exercise your rights. Equity is about...
Prof, since you've taken the first one, please, can I pass it for the sake of time?
I just want to say that the men have been with, some men have been with us. And I think it's important that we recognize them, both in the movement. Mauli is here. Adolf has been the coordinator of the Domestic Violence Coalition and has done amazingly. And many of us have men in our lives, partners, spouses, brothers, who we couldn't have been the feminists that we wanted to be if they had, crowded our space. And so I felt that it's important to acknowledge that.
Thank you very much. So now we know the disrespectful wives who don't want to take their husbands' names. Be warned. Prof, I don't mean to provoke you, but the equity and equality.
But before then, I just wanted to reinforce Akosia's point. This business about bra burning, we don't even have enough bras to wear here. But we must insist that there are many strands of feminism. It is not a weakness. It's like political ideologies. Somebody says they are liberal. Somebody says they are Democrat. Some people are Christian Democrats. Some people are social Democrats. Some people are market Democrats. Whatever it is. That is not the problem. That is not the problem. We cannot all be one. It's not about uniformity. But at the same time, we cannot say that you call yourself a feminist and go and beat your wife or allow yourself to be beaten. That is not feminism. That is not feminism. So I think that there are some things that we cannot really, what do you say? Yeah, they are not negotiable, So I think that it is important, it is a movement. Today we are celebrating International Women's Day because some women went on strike in 1908. And here we are celebrating. So I think that we need to educate ourselves about so many things. Akosia gave many pointers in a keynote address. And it relates to the point about, somebody asked, is there something that has happened recently? It's so difficult because, like we've said, it's a zigzag movement. You make some progress. In fact, sometimes I'm surprised that some issues are still being debated now about cooking and all of those things. I like to cook as an expression of my creativity. And indeed, there are people who say, she can cook. It's a big surprise. I don't need to apologize to anybody. I do it because I want to. I don't do it every day. I couldn't do it with all the things that I have to do. I couldn't be in some relationship where somebody is telling me where my boundaries are and which rooms are mine and that kind of crap. No. But if I want to, I will do it. And I have many friends who look forward to an invitation from me because it's part of my friendship, that I invite you to come and cook. The issue about equality and equity. Very few people have any problems with equity. It's the equality thing that really galls them. Equality is not sameness. We don't want to be men. I don't want to be a man. I don't want to be a man. But it's the same men who made the Constitution, who enshrined equality as a principle, who also oppose it. Today, everybody talks about the SDGs. There is a standalone goal on gender equality. Everybody subscribes to it, except when it comes to its implementation. And we're talking about the right. This morning, I was listening. There were so many programs on International Women's Day, and somebody was talking, I think it was Shamima Muslim, some study that they did, where everywhere they went, the girls were doing better than the boys, okay? And yet, at some point, it just stops. What happens? What happens? This natural ability that, and I'm not being essentialist, that young women get. At some point, they are blocked. They are telling them that, it is not feminine, it is not natural, it's not. We're talking about these opportunities that we want to be given to everybody, irrespective. And Gifty, let me just say, we've spoken a lot. It sounds very urban, And this is, I go to the market, I've been going to Malata market sometimes, and I'm distressed at the numbers of very young children in the market, all female, carrying loads. It's like an epidemic. Every week you see them. This is a problem. And they're coming from places around the country where livelihoods cannot be sustained. So you have these child migrants coming out, waiting to be exploited. We're talking about teenage pregnancies. We're talking about adolescent pregnancies. We really need to do something about these rural areas where many of these things were happening. Because you were talking about porn films. The people who are defiling 4-year-olds, they are not watching any porn film. There is something going on in our society, and we need to deal with it. Really, and a lot has to do with the deprivations in our rural areas, which are also continuing in the urban areas. So equality forever.
The time is now, right? With this issue about these young girls, who are headquarters on the market, it's very, very worrying, and I think we need to really take a look at it, because I remember the first time my husband and I went to the market and we saw these children and we're confused. We didn't know whether to let them help us for us to pay them or just let them go, because if you let them go, they need the money, that's why they're there. And then if you give them the job to do, it's like you are exploiting them. So what do you do? Of course, in the long run, we just give them money to go. But sometimes you're torn between, you don't really know what to do. And it's tough. It's tough, and I think we are just taking for granted.
The minister is saying that she's launching some campaign. It's a big issue, because not only in the markets, again, when you drive at so many intersections, there are women and children. I don't know whether those children are their children, wherever they've come from, very young and very poor looking women and children who are living on the street, and it's a lot. It's not just those families from Niger. These are Ghanaians, and something has to happen, really. Not in a punitive, come and load them away, but to get to the root causes, because it's an eyesore. The children are not in school. This morning, the First Lady was talking about the free SHS, and she says, for those who are able to take advantage of that opportunity. But there are so many people that when you go to the market, it's like have they heard what is going on in Ghana? We are building not even 2 Ghanas, we are building about 4 Ghanas, and this is we are sowing the wind, and there is a whirlwind that we will reap.
Thank you very much. Prof. Rachel, do we hate men? Do feminists hate men? Is feminism about hating men?
You know,
taking
one
the power
thing,
from them?
Yeah, thanks. One thing about any struggle, you know, because struggles are about social issues, we need to give it a name, right? So we need to name the problem, and so we name it like patriarchy, right? And we need to name our struggle, right? So the struggle is called feminism. Yeah, but then we know that there are people who benefit from the system. Okay, we talk about men as a final beneficiaries, but we also know that even amongst men there are patriarchal things, and then finally also men, some men are also disadvantaged, right? But what's happening is that the only way people can undermine your struggle is to delegitimize your strongest weapon. So all this thing about feminism, and I don't want to be called a feminism, is at the heart of the struggle. As soon as you want to distance yourself from it. So what happens? We get to see more and more of images of very ultra radical feminists, and then they tell you that this is all what feminists are. It's like socialism, it will catch you. It's like Marxism, it will catch you. So already you don't want to be called a Marxist, you don't want to be called a socialist, you don't want to be called a feminist. And that's the end of the struggle. That is the end of the struggle. As soon as we allow this F word to be delegitimized, we've lost the struggle. We should hold it, we should protect it. So, if you allow me just a little, it was Juliana, how do you educate men about feminism? You know, for a certain kind of woman is a certain kind of man, right? And now, so what is it for this kind of man, for this kind of woman, who has to be subordinated? So you need a man who has to be strong at all times, who has to be wise at all times, who has to be sexually virile. And that's how come in Ghana, we have all kinds of alcoholic beverages. It's like impotence. Impotence. There's an epidemic of impotence in Ghana, you know? Because the worst thing that can happen to that kind of man we have created that can subordinate that woman is for him to lose his potency. So people are making all kinds of things. He has to be the strongest. He has to earn more. He should never marry someone who is older than him and all that. He should be able to buy you a car. And so if he doesn't have it and there's a public purse by him, he will dip his hand into it and all that. So now, Juliana, did I get the name right? We are telling men that kind of hegemonic masculine men that should subordinate women. It's hurting men. Now in Ghana we have fewer men than women. Right? Why? Because of all the risky behaviors men are exposed to. And then if you're a man, you shouldn't cry. You shouldn't show too much emotion. You shouldn't do housework. So men, and you should eat a certain kind of food if your wife doesn't cook food and give you fat. So what is happening to the men? They are diabetic, they are hypertensive. They can't show emotion. And so if there are any doctors here, they will tell me if I'm wrong, please let me know. And all there is. So if we go to work, and the workplace, there's a threat to someone's health. Because women get pregnant and it will show, then we say the women should go away, the men should come and do it. But then the risk will not show. It will show when they are retired. And the employer no longer has that obligation. So let the men say that the women are not weak. If it is not good for the woman, it is not good for humanity. We fight it. So we want to tackle a certain kind of masculinity and tell them that it is hurting them and they should let it go.
And tell them that it is hurting them. Finally, Nanoye. In conclusion, your take.
Well, my take is, I'll still go back to the cooking issue and how disappointed I am in all of us that in this day and age, we talk about cooking. We should be talking about girls whom we are training to be astronauts, going to Mars. For heaven's sake, Ghana is 61 years. And when I step out of here, I'm sure I can get wache, I can get banku, I can get yam, I can get banku and okro. We're talking about cooking. Talking about cooking, there are better things to debate about. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And to add to what Nanoye just said, to quote a certain Nana Ansakwao, the kitchen has no gender. And women are not married to keep the kitchen company and because the kitchen is lonely. But for me, I'm a Christian and I like to base my conclusion on the visit of the Lord Jesus to the home of Mary and Martha, where one of them decided that she was going to cook for our Lord Jesus Christ to eat and be filled. And the other decided to sit at the feet of Jesus and listen. The kitchen-loving woman was very upset that the Lord did not tell, is it Mary or Martha? I know the story, but I've forgotten the names. Wouldn't you tell my sister to come and help me? And what did the Lord say? You will not have me here forever. So it is more than the message. It is more for me to, it's more important for you to tap into wisdom and knowledge and adding value to ourselves rather than worrying about what to cook and what to do and the bedroom, whatever. There's more to us as women than just cooking and, the rest. On that note, I say praise the Lord to all of you. Thank you.
Okay, so I'd like to call on Jejong to give a little poetry recital and then we can go on. Please welcome her.
Good evening. It's an honor to be in the midst of everybody here today. I have this poem that I wrote last year for Women's Day. Aren't you tired, woman, of the silent solidarity, of the quiet protests, of the men who bow ass up face down to your body like it is holy, yet high-five the men who curse it? Aren't you tired of your voice being sacrificed for masculinity, of the men who claim to love you like a brother would but troll your violations in allegiance to a brotherhood? Aren't you tired of forgiving these men who know nothing of forgiveness? These men who don't seek permission before swimming inside you. These men who don't wait for a yes or accept a no. Aren't you mad? Aren't you sick of hiding your rage and having to flaunt shame in its place? Aren't you tired of being outraged on behalf of other women? Aren't you sisters by way of rights? Aren't you here by way of compassion? Aren't you tired of the men who lured you with the ash they claim from burning her spirit? Of the men who shoot their shot at you but use her face as target practice? Aren't they shit for not knowing how to be men when they're flaccid? For how they point fingers at other women, call them guilty too after seeing this? Aren't you pissed at the progress of the process it takes to be seen as feminine and equal rights soldiers? Feminism is vinegar to the tongue. Rape is still her fault. The vocabulary for sexually free women expands offensively. Aren't you shook to the core that he gets to stage a comeback? Because he looks like a gentleman, because he's a celebrity, because maybe he didn't do it, but the fact that he did still remains foreign. Must you first feel the struggle to get it? Must you know how much stomach it takes to swallow a scream to digest it? How much backbone it takes to carry the body of a man who has the weight of superiority on his shoulders? When he quotes the Bible now, do you wonder if he knew of God then? Wonder what verses told him to rape those women and then find some zen? Aren't you mad enough to hope that he gets ripped apart by those same scriptures and post it up for everyone liking and commenting on his Instagram pictures? Is your anger not within reason? Do you not deserve some justice even when you're not somebody? Do you not deserve it as a person? For how much longer must you justify your frustrations with all this anonymous pain lurking in the foreground? Aren't you tired, woman? Aren't you? I am. Thank
you. We'll move on to our next panel. Right. So I would like to call on the moderator, Efia Kwachiwa Owusu-Nyantechi, to take her seat. She shall be joined by Shamima Muslim, Mame Adjoa Mafo, Efe Planche, Felicity Nelson, and Kakra Forson.
Hello, everybody. Hello? All right. I'm very nervous. Can you tell? Okay, all right. I mean, when you have pioneers and women who've been doing this for so long sitting here, you feel like you know everything. You know everything that you need to know, because as a feminist myself, it was a word I could not associate with. And to be able to do that comfortably now is because of all these conversations we keep having in our homes, with our friends, and in our online spaces as well. So let's carry on. So ladies, just before I jump into it, I had a very interesting conversation with a friend yesterday. We were driving somewhere and he asked if I was a feminist, and I said yes, and he said, oh, you're one of those. So I said, yes, I am. And I asked him why he said that, and instead of answering, what he did instead was to ask me, are women really oppressed? And he rolled his eyes because he felt as though we were making a mountain out of nothing. Are we really oppressed? Are we really having challenges? So I'm going to ask this question as a reflection of what I'm thinking is a way a lot of people are thinking now, that women are actually just making a ton of noise. Feminists are actually making a whole mountain out of nothing that actually exists. So I'll start with Ife. I know you don't want to say, no pressure. What do you think? Do you think we are battling the same issues? Do you think we have issues to actually deal with right now, to consider struggling as a feminist and having these conversations we're having right now?
Yes, there's every reason for us to continue the conversation. And that has been part of the resistance towards PDM, because for a long time we've become complacent. That's what I think. And that was what has fed into this perception that somehow we don't have any gender issues. But we do. I think for me, my biggest issue now is us having this very narrow definition of who an empowered woman is. And that is what is making a lot of people not realize what the real issues are. Oh, women are going to school now. We have women heading all these high-profile, positions, and all of that. And so, of course, women are fine. And it's because of this narrow definition that is making us fail to see the persistent issues that, are of gender, concerns.
Shamima, what's your take on that?
I think, good evening once again. I will call myself a hybrid. And there's a story to that, a hybrid between the older generation and the so-called new generation. Because in my early 20s, when I had just graduated from, why are you giving me the side eye? When I just graduated from Legon, I had the opportunity to work with Legal Resources Center. And I think I was around the time that the DV Coalition was being set up or so. So I was the representative of the Legal Resources Center on the DV coalition. So that was where all these great women were, and look what me, small minds. It was a great learning curve for me to be part of that long process till date. So I have a sense of the energy and the commitment and the sacrifice that the senior trailblazer generation gave the cause of women issues. And of course, as a woman in media now, I recognize the tremendous role that the media can and should play in informing and shaping more empowering narratives. So for anyone who tells you because they live in a city and they see all these upwardly mobile, beautiful, energetic, creative, entrepreneurial, great, young, old, mid-aged women achieving great things for themselves, it means they probably never have sat in a bus and gone anywhere outside the boundaries of Accra. Because if they even within Accra took a trip to, say, Nima, Mamobi, to, say, Jamestown, you know, just that is even within Accra, to, say, a village in my hometown, Wa. And we've been seeing those videos recently. If you've been watching TV3, Bright Amfo has been bringing us videos of the realities that children and communities face on a daily basis just to survive. One example that really broke my heart recently was a video about children who had left the classroom to work on yam mounds in the farm so they could plant and hopefully harvest and hopefully sell and hopefully earn some money and hopefully buy some furniture for their class. 21st century Ghana. Yes. So if anybody tells you that, yeah, we are full and we're looking for all kinds of things, it means the person's worldview is very narrow.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about all the issues we talk about, there are many. We have education, for instance. We have financial freedom, whether women are financially free to make certain decisions for themselves. We talk of sexuality, rape culture. The issues are many. So I want to ask, where do you think we are now in this struggle, in this conversation? Mame, you want to take that?
I think it's difficult to define where we are because in everybody's individual journey, they might be in different places.
Right.
But I think where we are moving to is a feminism that is inclusive and a feminism that understands the ways in which different structures interact so that we don't leave out the most marginalized people in society. Because if your feminism is self-serving and it's about you and the position you're in, you will fight for only your liberation and leave the other women behind.
Right.
So even the ways in which class interact with your gender, the ways in which sexuality interact with gender, the ways in which different race interact with gender, all those things are part of the ways in which we experience life and our lived experiences. And we have to acknowledge that in some ways, even though you are maybe not as privileged as a woman, there are queer women, right. There are trans women, right. There are women who are not classed, women who are not privileged, women who are poor, right. Who also have certain things that they are a part of the feminist movement, and their struggles and their issues are our issues. Okay. I think that's where we have to be.
Right. Francisca, what's your take on that?
Yes, thank you. I think that we seem to be moving around in a big circle. And as a young woman, I think I've gone past 30. I don't know if I should still refer to myself as a young woman. But as a young woman, that's the frustration. And I find a lot of women our generation to be angry about the frustration of not knowing where it is going. You're not exactly sure where you're at. You just know that this was not an issue some years ago, but today it's an issue. Right. I grew up, my dad would be in the kitchen, my mom would be in the kitchen, and so I grew up in a house where the kitchen didn't have a gender. You know, whatever you carry between your legs didn't determine that you stay in the kitchen or you don't. And as you grow up and you leave your home, that is if your home is not as sexist as other homes, it's outside your door. At a certain level, it's in your home. During adolescence, you notice that your brother is treated in a little way superior than you are.
More freedom, maybe.
More freedom. He's going to be the it for the family. He's going to bring fortune to the family. He's going to take the name to that next level. And so you have this struggle. In these times, you're able to talk about them, but you don't know where it's going, and it can be very frustrating. Right. Some of us are angry, and I think we should be allowed to be angry. There are those who are not angry, but it doesn't mean they don't show an emotion. There's also an emotion. I believe not being angry is also an emotion. And at least we are showing emotion, at least we are talking about it. Right. But how we react to the frustration of not knowing where we're going with women's empowerment or women's equality or women's rights, we should be allowed to have a certain kind of reaction.
All right, thanks. Francisca, Felicity, can you take this? You're a very vocal person online, and the outlets available to us today are quite different from what was available years ago. People criticize that social activism or feminists who make all the noise on these online spaces are really living the life of a feminist, or just looking for some attention, or really they are not going to make any impact with all the conversations going on online because it does not transcend to the actual life a woman, a modern Ghanaian woman is living, or a woman in Ghana would be living today. Do you agree? Do you feel there's an impact, or you feel as though?
Okay, so I completely disagree with the notion that social media is not a valid place to have feminist conversations, and that it only remains on social media and it's only noise and you're only doing it for attention. Because we need to recognize that social media gives you a wider reach. It gives you a much wider reach than you would. Like, if I wanted to speak to a woman in North, I would have to travel there. But now, with the advent of technology, I can send the same messages via social media and has a wider reach. And the reality is, since Pepperdem started, we're all here today because Pepperdem started online. That's why we're all here. I'm not saying everyone's doing their feminist things in their own spaces, but then Pepperdem has brought this event together. So having a place on social media doesn't delegitimize your movement. Actually, it's because that's a space in which we have so many Ghanaians now, so many young people, and even listening to the type of comments that people give, you realize that there's so much more work to be done on the so-called educated class. Because most people on social media are educated to a certain level, and even with them, the type of mindsets, because maybe, yes, FGM does not exist in Accra, but we're still policing women's bodies in the same way on social media. Look at the ways in which, Ghanaians even spoke about Ebony, and because she embraced her body in a way that we didn't approve of. So we cannot ignore these things and think, oh, it only happens in the North. Or the reason why people keep pointing us to these places is because they don't want to approach the issues in their face. So it's a way of deflecting attention away from them. So it's a them problem, they're othering, so they don't have to deal with the ways in which they marginalize women in their everyday life as well.
Well said. Another conversation that keeps coming up now is approach. I feel as if it's actually probably the main bone of contention people seem to have. A friend of mine actually online said, and quoted later, as a feminist who was very polite in her approach, or very cordial in her approach. But he doesn't feel as though women today who claim to be feminists are doing the same. And it creates the perception that women are expected to be very polite about these conversations, about these issues we're talking about. What do you think about that?
First of all, we're talking about different playing fields here. I mean, social media is different. It provides a different experience to everything. And so we should also be mindful of those, those petty differences. Nana Oyelite's era, there wasn't social media. Now there's social media. And I mean, we believe that there's even more reason for us to be on social media, because without Pepperdem, we'll still be on social media anyways. And if you're tackling mindsets and perceptions, where better to start than a platform that deals primarily with opinions? You understand? That's number one. And so social media is very, very important. Secondly, there are people who can never be won. There are people who are like, who we can win, but there are some we can never win, and we should be ready to accept that. And for such people, they will always come to the table with something to pick on. And so that is also another recognition that we need to give. Secondly, the whole point of what we are doing is to say, give me room, let me exist as I am. And I am a vocal, boisterous, loud person. Everybody brings their own individuality to the movement. Let's take preaching, pastors. The same message. Dr. Mensa Otabel will say it, very calmly. Put Archbishop Duncan Williams there, and he will add a few theatrics to it. Put Obinim, and you go all of the way. You understand? So everybody, maybe the same message, but everybody comes to the table with their own, individual personalities, and we should give room for that. We grew up in different environments. We've been shaped by different things. All of these things have impact on the ways in which we turn out in terms of articulating our thoughts, fighting for what we believe in, and standing up for others. And we should respect that. That is the whole point of what we are doing. We say give women, take women out of the box you've put them, and appreciate all the different kinds of forms that they can exist in. So that's mine.
All right. Shamima, I mean, you've lived in the limelight for quite a while. You have to engage people on a constant. And this is, as I was saying, a bone of contention for a lot of people. I know it's in a way, it's kind of tied to what values we ascribe to as Ghanaians. But for you, first of all, do you see approach as a significant contribution to getting the message across at all? The Pepperdem approach or the Sugardem approach?
Well, I've been asked directly this question, and I've been asked to state my preference. And I say, look, I'm too strong in this media game for you to try to get to corner me in a place that you want so you can use it for your ill ends, right? So, look, the same arguments our seniors made were the arguments I made. I said to the person, women are not homogeneous. We are not a homogeneous band. In here, in this room, there are different colors, different shades, different sizes, different statuses, different social statuses. So our needs and our wants and our approaches can never, ever be the same. And at every point in time, too much meat never spoils the food, right? Because you're trying to speak to the differentiated audience as much as possible with different approaches and different strategies. The end goal is the same if it brings home the bacon. I don't eat bacon anyway, but if it does, it's good enough. If sugar them and licking them will bring parity and equity, hallelujah. If gingering them would lead to a rude awakening to the reality that put up or shut up, amen. So let people, at least we are expressing, at least we are engaging, at least we are questioning the status quo, at least we are present. And sometimes all it takes is to be present to change something in a way that you think it's preferable to you.
Well said. And this is a question I think everybody else should have the opportunity to answer. For me, I think identifying as a feminist is a journey of unlearning so many things, making a ton of mistakes, and kind of figuring it out as I go. Because all you know at the basics is that this isn't right. I shouldn't be spoken to this way. I should be able to do this or that because I'm human, not because I'm woman. And so for me, I find it's a journey that I'm having to let go certain things I was told and pick up things that I feel are right. What would you consider your personal struggle identifying yourself as a feminist and the struggle in general?
So before I get to that, I just want to say about the politeness thing. I don't understand why politeness is required of me. I genuinely don't understand, because I think for a lot of people, feminism is ideology and it's ideas. But at the basis of it are people's lives and people's actual experiences. So if someone is talking about rape, someone is talking about not having access to certain resources, and they are angry about these things and they are emotional about these things, they should be allowed to express everything that they are saying. I don't owe you politeness when you are trying to infringe on my life. I do not owe my oppressor politeness. So if you are coming to me to oppress me, why do I have to say, oh, please? When has that ever been a thing that we have expected of people? So why do we expect that of women? But in calling myself a feminist, I think I didn't struggle so much, because I held feminist values before I knew feminism as a set of ideals and principles. And I started to self-describe as a feminist very early on. I was maybe 12, 13. Because I would read about feminism, and I decided that it was in line with how I felt. Because to call myself anything else felt like a denial of myself. So I said it, and people had their opinions, and people had, their reactions, and people had their attitudes. But it's also, when you're young, you really don't care about certain things. Like, youth allows you a certain freedom from, I'm thinking, how do they feel about me in certain ways when you're very young? So I didn't have to do all the mental gymnastics about, I want to be a cool girl, I want the boys to like me. I just didn't care. So I didn't struggle very much.
I want to draw from what you were saying. I've always, growing up, I've always been, my twin sister and we've always been nonconformist. We were playing football way back in school, and we were playing football like boys. And so we used to get teased a lot as being boys anytime we played football. The point is that as you're growing up, certain things do not sit well with you. When I started working, work. In fact, I wanted to work even before I was 18, but my parents would not allow me. Around 1920, I managed to get an internship at Joy FM. And when I went there was an expectation that I conformed as a young woman, as an intern who didn't have a job per se, but was just there to learn the ropes. And you find yourself getting into trouble because I cannot conform. My mom saw my haircut and said, hey, another one. I cannot do the things that I know deep down are truly not me. And anybody who knows me and has grown up with me will attest to this. I think that a lot of us young women have these struggles within us. This is what we want to do, and this is what society is saying. So what are we going to do? And then we try, kind courtesy, the request for being polite and all that. We try to find a middle ground. So let me do it this way. Let me play football, but add some makeup and still look whatever. We try to find that middle ground, and I don't know what word to use, but you get to that middle ground and you're still not satisfied. You're still not happy about your situation. You have to be at that place that you want to be, deep down within you want to be, but society is telling you, hey, don't go there. And so you struggle within yourself even before you realize that there's a struggle going on. And then the kind of media you're exposed to. Unfortunately, I think Prof talked about it, the kind of media that we keep watching. They're telling you that the highest achievement is to find a man who puts a ring on your finger, take you to his house and marry you, and you live happily ever after. There is no point in that narrative that says that, oh, I love playing football. I play for Black Princess, Black Queens, Granny's Queens, or whatever. I continued that journey of the passion that I have. You don't get that anywhere. And that's the struggle. And when you discover that, oh, there's something called feminism, I didn't want to be associated with that word. One day I just told myself, I'm being very ignorant. Let me just go go on Google and just search about it. Why are people talking about it? What does it mean? What has it been made to mean? And then I have to discover for myself what it means to me. Heck, I'm an African woman. English is not my language. But even before I started, or even before Africans began learning English, we had all these things in us. We knew that these are the things we wanted to do. You know that you have a passion. A woman who doesn't speak, an illiterate woman, a woman who doesn't speak English, has passion. And that passion drives her to achieve what she wants. And so you have that struggle within you that pushes you, and then you encounter some kind of media that starts to open your eyes. And then you are not afraid to call yourself that. So for me, I struggled. I will not deny it. I struggled. Being in the media, being expected to act in a certain way, being tagged with 2 labels that I do not like. I know my rights. Emotional. Is there a woman here who hasn't been given that tag before? You know, and these days, I actually want you to tag me as somebody who knows her rights and somebody who is emotional. I cannot fathom a human being who doesn't have emotions. So I'd rather be emotional, and I'll claim it.
Felicia, Felicity, I would ask you to answer the same thing. For you, what's your struggle?
Okay, well, I've always been a non-conformist anyway, so I grew up and my closest friends were boys because all the girls, when you're playing, their moms would come over and say, oh, Amma, come inside and come and help me cook Kojo. And I lived with my grandma, and so she didn't expect the same tasks from me. So I would always play with the boys, and after a while, I began to realize that being a boy is fun, and being a girl, when you're playing, at some point in the play, you're going to have to stop and go and do house chores, and I thought, oh, don't want to do that. So I was more of a tomboy, and I just noticed that girls had to behave in, they had to be subtle, they had to be gentle, and there was always something about my genetic makeup, I think, that was against those things, and I just thought, oh, this makes me uncomfortable. And I couldn't relate to that behavior, and I knew that I was supposed to act in that way in order to be considered the right type of girl. And this is even from, I'm talking about 8 years old, 9 years old. There was something about that girl that I knew I didn't want to be, because I felt that she was being boxed in. At that stage, I even knew that she was being boxed in, and I don't want to be in that box, because that box, it was too restrictive. So when I finally realized that, kind of read about feminism, I was about 16, and I thought, yeah, I'm a feminist straight away. Like, I identified with it, and even the fact that it had bad PR, where people think that feminists are man-haters, and all the kind of negative things that came with feminism, I liked those things. I was never someone who cared much for people liking me. Anyway, like, I don't seek people's approval, so I knew that's not what feminism was. And even that people thought that that's what it is, it didn't matter to me. And it made me embrace it even more. Things that people don't like and reject, generally, I'm drawn to those things. So it's never really been a struggle for me at all. But okay. I do notice that when you say you're a feminist, people kind of jump back 3 times. And I'm like, yeah, good, you jump back. Because the thing is, there's something about that. They know, when it's even words like, I know my rights. Of course I want to know my rights. Why would I want to not know my rights? Because if I don't know my rights, that means that you will abuse my rights. So I don't think that there's anything positive in not knowing your rights. How can this be a negative thing? So when you say those things, I think there's actually something wrong with you.
Much more wrong with you than me. Well said. Shamima and Efe, I'll have you answer the same questions, and then I think we can throw it to the crowd, and we'll wrap up from there. So Shamima, would you go first? So the question is, what your struggle is?
I've always lived in 2 worlds, every stage of my life. So here I am, a young Muslim girl in a very large family. Growing up in Kotobabi in the 80s, our house was a melting pot from everybody who was traveling from our hometown, because my father was one of the early settlers in Accra here, and with ingenuity, he made a life for himself. So at any point in time in our house, we had not less than 30, 40 human beings being fed morning, afternoon, evening. I was my dad's first daughter, so, well, they were bigger aunties. So at dinner time, you had big bowls so this is the big bowl for the big boys, the adult men, young men, adult women, young women, children male, children female, the mummies in the house. Dad had 2 wives. So, right, so, and you would do the washing of those bowls as you're growing, right? Hard work. My mommy will always tell me that, have you ever heard somebody died from hard work before? And I was supposed to be, I was supposed to be lazy, even then. Ramadan was my most hateful experience, because Ramadan, the cooking is apt, because all kinds of visitors are coming to your home to eat. And you would wash bowls, and wash, and wash. Right. So I grew up knowing that a woman's place was to work at home, real hard. But my mom was a teacher, and she went to school accidentally. Of my grandparents, her father, she and another lady perhaps were the only people that had education. And that was because she was always interested in reading. So she said, look, everybody would use the lantern. And when they went to sleep, she goes to pick it up. And any piece of paper she finds, she would, in the thick of the night, she'd lay down and she'd be struggling to read. So an uncle, her big brother, who was then a student at Cape Vast, comes home one day and sees that, oh, she's reading. So, well, would you want to go to school? She said yes. At this time, people were saying a girl didn't have to go to school, blah, blah, blah. And she would work and work and work and go and stand by a classroom where they were teaching people. And she was not a student. She just runs to go and hide there and just listen, and she also learned. That's how she went to school. And her life path changed. But work at home for a woman and the role of a woman at home was enshrined. And this was a traditional setup that I grew up in. And at the same time, I had an opportunity to attend Morning Star. So you see, so here was me in Morning Star with rich kids who come to school early. I was always late, you know. Sometimes if we didn't have porridge, I had to carry a silver to Mama Obi to buy porridge. And it was this day I was carrying this silver, the 5 silvers, you know them, one of the big ones, to buy for them to share for people in the house before I get ready to school. And I was crossing the road. The owner of Def Traco, Joseph Edu, was a schoolmate. They were passing to school. And here I was with, you know, to go and buy cocoa, because we couldn't prepare cocoa that morning. So hard work, or the fact that women, you have to work. I grew up with that kind of environment, but I survived and proceeded to go to university, and within perhaps one of the first girl to actually go through the university. So women rights, so it was a struggle. But you see, my mom was learned in the Quran. My mom always told me that the Quran is the most feminist book she has ever come across. Of course, with all religious texts, there will be those texts that you will read and you will cringe. And it would challenge you, you would wonder. But then you come across those liberating texts, like the fact that a woman is not enjoined in Islam to take her husband's name upon marriage, or that knowledge is compulsory, the acquisition of knowledge is compulsory for the Muslim man and the Muslim woman. And if you had to go as far as China to seek it, you were enjoined to go and seek it. When you come across this liberating text, the fact that a woman has rights to income, which is hers, to determine how to use, without influence or sway from her husband. When you come across, this is feminist language, is it not? And yet we have all agreed here that being a feminist doesn't mean you don't cook.
to invite friends or take care of your family and all of that. We have all agreed to that, haven't we? In fact, the woman has such a role to play in shaping the minds, and that's why education is critical for the woman in Islam in terms of what the Quran teaches. What the practice is different, because we all know we come from patriarchal societies and people would always use religious texts in the ways that, suits their comfort, right? So the woman, it is because education is vital for especially a woman that she has such influence, or is expected to have such influence on the upbringing of her children. If education wasn't important, the Quran would not give a woman such huge responsibility. Of course, we are now saying that it's a shared responsibility between a man. So my journey never ends. It can never end, because it's a constant search and challenge and learning and relearning and unlearning, and we still soldier on. But the basic is that, what do you want? Woman, what do you want? And what would you do for what you want?
Well said. Okay, so for me, it's been a very long and winding journey, but I'll start with my mom. So my mom is an Ekuapim, and we know that Ekuapims have there's a stereotype with Ekuapims to be very humble and respectful, and growing up, that was like, my mom was popular for that in our extended family. So at my dad's side, at her side, she was the Ekuapim humble woman. And, that was her nature. That was her nature. She was, aside that, she's really fun. She was a huge fan of Ebony, so that should give you an idea. But she's fun and all, but she always, that was her image, that was her identity. And growing up, I found out that she always found the need to stick to it. And, show that, let that be her best foot, which isn't a problem. But then I found out that, I realized that she was also under pressure to produce the same kind, because that's what we want to see in women, right? So she was also under pressure to produce that same kind of, that product. Till date, she'll come into my mess room and say, hey, I'm a Grace, she was under pressure to produce that same kind of person. And that wasn't the problem. It was that everything that was being impacted in me, every training I was giving growing up, wasn't for me. It was always so nadacho warrior. And this was as early as 5, 6, 7, 8, your chores start. And it's always, I hate fufu. I hate the process of fufu. Hey, what if you go and marry a man who likes it morning, afternoon, and evening? Or you're watching your favorite cartoon, you're watching your favorite sitcom, and it's, come and do this in future. You will marry. And it was always for that, for a man. I want to do a second piercing. Ghanaian men don't like that. You see, it's... So for me, it wasn't the training per se, it wasn't the impact, but it was the reasons, that were being given that really annoyed me. And to date, she knows that if she wants to correct me, she better not add a mema or for a man. Otherwise, that is the more reason why I would do it. Because I tell her that the moment she exposes, she makes me realize that this is something men don't like, or men in an environment don't like. That is exactly what I do, because I don't want to attract the average man. I want to attract an extraordinary man. So she better not add that clause. So it was, it started from that, processing my upbringing and how everything was just revolved around men and for my future and for my husband. And it was just so annoying. It took away a lot of my childhood. Your playtime, you have to come and do this because you marry, because you do that. And then I started questioning. But generally, I had a very revolutionary dad. He was like the opposite of the average, Ghanaian man you find. He was very useful, helpful at home. I didn't think anything was male, female, unless my mom was the one impacting it. But he would grind meko, he would bathe us, he would get us ready for school. As old as, I think, 8, it was my dad who was getting me and my sister ready for school. And I even preferred him bathing for me, because bathing time was playtime. But my mom, no, she saw you playing that dirt, so she has to scrub your body for you to know that. And then my dad is more like, yay, let's have fun. And he was a Sunday school teacher. So we'll sing rhymes and play, and by the time you are done. So when it came to gender roles and gender expectations, like my dad was just, was just the opposite. But then here I was, and so he gave me that opportunity to be, to dream, and to just explore. My dad loved to travel. He would take us all around the country, to the hinterlands. Every vacation we'd go and travel. I saw what was happening elsewhere, and that all of that also impacts on your imaginations. And then, so I was vocal throughout my primary and junior high schools. And to date, my primary school teachers and JHS teachers will see me, and they're not surprised with everything I'm doing now. They're like, as for Efe, that girl, we know her. But here I was, as vocal and as strong and as forceful as I was, and I was still, I wouldn't want to be called a feminist. I mean, people would call me. At a very young age, I was called Gifty Auntie at some point. I was called Mame Dokno at some point. But, when it came to feminism, I would, reject the tag. I was like, because we all knew what was done to feminists, what feminists lived through here. The image, they said feminists don't get married. I said, me, I like love, Papa. Hey, And so as for the tag, it took a while until in my final year in college, I took a course that nobody was willing to take because the woman who taught it was too Mame Jata. And today, wherever she is, if she's listening, if you know her, Mrs. Philomena Abaka. She used to be Mrs. Philomena Abaka, now she's Philomena Yeboah. She's taken on her husband's name now. And I took her course, Female Writers of Africa. And I got introduced to writers like Mariam Abba, Chichi Danganriba, Ama Ateidu. I had encountered Ama Ateidu books, I think Marriage of Anansawa, but those were, very mild themes, till I encountered the real ones. And then I was like, okay. The realities of an educated African woman and the blurry lines between culture and religion and the loyalties that she's expected to play to all of these things, plus the manifestation and the responsibility of her to show proof of her education. Mm-hmm. How are you educated but having to conform to some of these, problematic cultural and traditional expectations? And for me, that was what really opened my eyes, and I was like, okay. So I started reading about feminism, and I started impacting my knowledge and trying to understand how the system of patriarchy works, and that's why I love that word so much. Once I began to notice how, the structure works and how it operates on our minds, and everything, it just gave me the power. And so I had always been a strong girl. I had always been a confident girl. I just had to fine-tune it into something, something that I believed in.
Yeah. Wonderful. I think now that we all have a good assessment of the ladies sitting up here, your questions are welcome. If you have anything to ask, this would be the time to do that. I have 5 minutes, so we're going to make it real quick. So we will spend 2 minutes asking the questions, and then we can answer them.
Thank you for the contribution. So just a question. It strikes me that in a lot of the younger feminist organizing that I see, the feminism is working on invisible power. It's working on social cultural norms, cultural discourses and representation, but less so on the formal visible power. Like the previous generations worked a lot on law and policy, on the state and frameworks. And I'm just wondering if you think that's a fair assessment, and if so, why is it so? Is there an appetite for working on formal power and transforming formal power relations, or do you feel that the impetus is more to work on this in the social cultural domain, in individual beliefs and ideas and practices, and how we're relating to each other in space?
Okay, so we'll keep that in mind. Another question?
Thank you very much. I must commend the generation that came before, because when we started getting aware of what the patriarchal society we live in, it was their direction of either the DV coalition. It was very focused. We're working towards something that can change. We're working towards very concrete things, not saying current concerns are not concrete. And my question actually dovetails into or out of yours. What are you continuing because the work is nowhere done. What are you continuing? What concrete goals are you looking at? What are you looking to change? Because we keep hearing we're changing the mindset, we're changing the paradigm. But I think one person said there's some things that are not going to change. Individualistic beliefs. For individuals, it's their right to think the way they want to think. But are we thinking about changing structures? Are we thinking about changing systems that can make you stand up and say, no, you cannot abuse me at the workplace because there's this in place and I can fall back on that for my rights, which I should know.
We'll take 3 more and then we'll try and answer those. There are many hands up, so we'll just wait until the next panel to do that. So there's a young man over there in the pink shirt.
Thank you very much. My question has to do with at what level would Dem say that we have achieved our goals? Like, at what level are you expecting? I went to Pusiga last 2 weeks, and female genital mutilation is still ongoing. As we mark the International Women's Day today, what will be your call?
Okay, 2 more. 2 more questions. And there's someone there who had her hands up for a while.
Thank you very much. I realize that this is a panel of writers, communicators, journalists, and so my question is about communication, because I think communication is essential to the entrenchment of any cause and the sustainability of any cause. And I want to borrow from a line from J. Jom's poem. She said something like, the vocabulary of a liberated woman rages offensively or something. And so I want to know from the panel of communicators, why do you think the vocabulary of feminism is so offensive? Is it the language itself that is problematic, or what is the problem? Is it too detached from reality? What is the problem?
Okay. 1 more question.
Hi, my name is Selassie. I would like to know, the biggest single cause of maternal mortality is complications from unsafe abortions. What can we as young feminists do to improve the situation? Thank you.
Okay. This will be the last one, and then the next question could be after the next panel.
Thank you. I think it's very critical given the context of the dialogue or the conversation today. What will the new generation or the new gen want or expect from the intergen and the pace setters to support in this journey? You've all talked about experience, your motivation, what is inspiring you. What kind of support do you anticipate?
Okay. All right. So I think one of the running questions is basically what you intend to achieve. So this will go to the Dem members. Effie, you want to take that?
So with Jessica Horn's question, I think that's a very fair assessment. It's a very, very fair assessment, your assessment you made. And that is because none of us actually set off to be activists or advocates. The tags were actually just put on us, and we decided, okay, let's make good use of this. For us, it was just talking on social media, like I would go and talk about Black Panther or talk about anything else. But then I decided to dedicate my page. She decided to dedicate her opinions and her voice to gender issues. That is how basically it started for us. I may have had some bits of gender training from my master's studies. Others haven't had that. And we know that a lot of theory and a lot of technical knowledge also needs to go into this. So that's also something that we need to bear in mind. At the end of the day, that is why we are here today, and that is why the next session is really important. We need help. Now I know how to talk. Nobody can take my voice away from me. But how do we approach the system, the structures, to get policy work done and to push for bills, and that we need help? I'm going to sit here and talk for myself even before the team comes in. We definitely need help. But I think that with the voices and with the power of our voices, that is obviously also a very great tool to use. I mean, we brought the entire nation to a standstill. The entire nation came to a standstill because of our voices and our relentlessness. So it is important, but we definitely need help. So we are here. for help.
Okay. Felicity, I want you to take this one. I think the other question the man over there asked was, what would be, I'm paraphrasing, what would be the ideal picture where you say Pepperdem has done this significant and it's impactful?
Okay, I don't really envision that we'll ever reach a stage where we'll say we're done. I don't think that we'll ever reach that stage, because even if certain issues stop happening, with gender issues, like we're now, okay, like in the UK, you have the right to vote, everyone has the right to vote, but then there's other issues, there's gender pay gap, so there will always be new issues that will crop up after you solve the old issues. So I don't ever think that Pepperdem would say we are finished or we have reached our optimum levels. But we want to see there has to be progress, and that's why we're pressing for progress. There has to be progress, and that's where the focus is on. So I don't really see it as an end goal, like this is where it will end. I think that even the things that we're doing today, to see the real changes, is going to take about 50 years, maybe 100 years, maybe we won't even live to see the changes that we're trying to effect. So that's not the aim. It's just looking at the future generation and hoping that the females especially can live a better lives and have better opportunities than we did.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Just so that it's not as though it's the responsibility of Pepperdems to ensure that women get to a certain level. I think for the gentleman who asked the question, great question. But for you as a man who lives in a society with women, where would you also want women to be?
Good question.
So I think that that's a responsibility or a burden that we must all bear, irrespective of our genders. I want to speak about personally what I want to do. I'm a young communication and person and journalist. What I want to do is to tell stories or make films about women in Ghana and the kind of women I want my daughters, your daughters, their sons to see. Enough about talking about the problems of Ghana. We will always have problems. And as a media person, I think that there's a huge responsibility on us because we control what people consume and thus they become. And so we all need to ask ourselves, because we're all storytellers in the making, what kind of stories do we want to tell the next generation so that they won't be sitting here talking about cooking, talking about God knows what. The conversation would have moved on from there. And so every one of us has a kind of responsibility.
Okay, great. The last question we would take, and Mami and Shamima, you probably would answer to that. A young lady asked, what exactly do people find problematic about the word feminism? Is it the language, or is it what about it makes it so problematic?
I think, what do you find wrong about, the definition of the word feminism? Because I think one thing we've all agreed is that sometimes you need to find a name to help you move along. It will mean different things for different people. So look for the bit that is comfortable for you and go with it. That's all I would say. But as also, just to conclude, the women in media, I know that when we're doing a lot of the activism towards DV Coalition, there always seems to be this schism between the activists and those in positions of power and influence to make change. Moving forward, in the formation of coalitions, we need to work to have representations of from people who are in policy making, from media especially, women in media especially, which I represent. I'm here on behalf of the Alliance for Women in Media Africa. And we have to learn what the discourse is about. And we need to present stories. Right now, there's so much opportunity to create and distribute content. I mean, BBC is opening an Igbo service, a Hausa service, a Pidgin service. They're telling us that they now want to recruit Africans who are telling African stories. Hello? So what are we doing? Obviously, there's such rich information that we could use to create content ourselves, but we cannot create compelling content if we ourselves don't create the space to educate and be open to new experiences, new learnings, so we can inform in a more informative and educative manner. Social media, unfortunately, is turning everybody into a creator and a distributor of content, and in the era of fake news, we now know that legacy media is a go-to option for validation. So for those of us who are in legacy media, there's a renewed opportunity for us to reassert ourselves as authorities for true, authentic, real, relevant, and meaningful stories of women from the continent.
Thank you. Thank you, Rima. So, Mame, your final words and then a response to the question that was asked. Is feminism problematic?
I think the reason why the word feminism is such a hot word for people now is because the movement is uncomfortable. The word is uncomfortable because the movement is uncomfortable for them. And the movement is uncomfortable for them because anything that is going to get in the way of what has systematically advantaged you will be uncomfortable. Nobody wants their power removed. Everybody thinks that their power has to be removed for somebody else to come. That's what they expect from feminists or from feminism, is that it's going to disadvantage me and full stop. And so that's why they get so upset. And that's why they're in their feelings about certain things. No, honestly, that's really what's still, they're just in their feelings about it. Why do they have to do this too? Why do women have to do this too? It's really about being in their feelings and not wanting to be disadvantaged. But in the room today, I feel like there's also been a lot of conversation about feminism being about being able to make choices for yourself and being able to choose what you want to do. But I think feminism also has to be about interrogating the reasons why we make certain choices and the reasons why we like what we like. Because we cannot pretend that we grew up in vacuums. We have all been affected by the society that we grew up in. If you find your worth in cooking for a man, maybe interrogate that. Maybe think that through a little bit. If you find your worth in performing certain things that have been expected of you, just think about it a little bit and see whether that's actually what you as a human being want, or that's what you've been taught to want as well.
That's deep. Thank you, ladies. Thank you so much. It's been a wonderful, insightful panel, and I think my parting was basically the approach will be different, whether you like it or not. There was an MLK and then there was a Malcolm X, but they got the job done. They got the job done. So let's be prepared to listen more than to argue or to be combative. This is basically to find an ideal space where women and men can make decisions that benefit them, that ultimately make us happy. That's really it. So treat yourself, treat others the way you want to be treated. That's really the bottom line of feminism or any kind of activism. Thank you.
I would like to call on Akosia Hansen, who will be moderating the bridge session. Akosia is part of the group called Drama Queens. Drama Queens. Well, not that they...
Drama Queens, ma'am. You're Drama Queen.
Okay, not that she's a drama queen, in the way... Oh, you are? Okay, she says she is a drama queen. You can see that. All right, so I would like to call on Kina Likimani, Dinah Adiko, Rita Inketia, Sheila Minka Premo, Marcia Mamag Ashong, and myself.
Okay, so I guess we're going to start this panel. I actually wanted to go through the bios because I kept worrying everyone to send me bios, but we don't have the time. So we'll just definitely jump into the discussions. We've heard from the pioneering generation, we've heard from the current generation. So my question now is going to be, do you think that the current movement of feminism engages enough with the pioneering movements of feminism? Do we know their struggles? Like, for instance, it was this year I particularly heard about the serial killings and how women stood for that. It was only in this year, and I call myself a feminist, but I hadn't engaged with that. What do you think?
Does anybody want? Okay. The short answer is no. And I think there are lots of reasons why that's the case. Can you guys hear me okay? I feel the mic is a bit low. I think that perhaps one, I mean, if we think about the context of Ghana specifically, right? I believe that we live in a kind of gerontocratic society, which basically means that old people rule it, or older people rule it, right? And I think that that creates a kind of divide, unfortunately, between younger people's activism and older people's activism. I think that perhaps we also don't always know where to go to find this history, you know? I know for myself, I don't know enough about Ghanaian feminist history, and that's a shame. And I think that it's something we need to work on. That's my short answer. Yeah.
Okay, I also don't think that the two are talking. And I think that it's very important to build bridges, because those of us, well, at least speaking for myself, I learned a lot from people who are ahead of me. You heard what Anoye indicated, that those of us who happen to be lawyers, we came to meet people like Professor Kwenye here, Auntie Dorcas, and co. They were using their knowledge to promote women's rights. And we learned a lot as far as several issues are concerned. So I think that the younger generation, they are doing their own research, have a lot of issues they've raised, but there's a need to link up with some of the older, or to bridge, so that some of the information they've gathered, the knowledge they've gathered, will find a way in which it could be more useful to the ordinary person. Remember, we're doing all this work not for ourselves. As we've gained more knowledge, as we've interrogated issues and know what needs to be done to make the life of other women much better, we need to be able to share information to move the process forward.
Now you want to speak.
Because I think it's an issue of centering. I mean, I'm appalled, actually. Because lettered younger feminists say, maybe they'll quote Gloria Steinem, or they will quote Audre Lorde. Why the assumption that there aren't Ghanaian feminists to quote, that there isn't Ghanaian research? So and Prof gave us the names. So that's what I find it disturbing that you say you don't know. Because it's not like the information is hidden. It's not hidden. So I would fault the younger generation for not looking. And it's about not centering ourselves. Because I don't think the older generation has to do anything more. If you are lettered and they are lettered, they've written, they've done their research, they have lived their life's experiences, they've made choices. So it comes from the assumption that there aren't any. And I don't know where people get that assumption from. It's a dangerous assumption. So hopefully today, a lot of names were mentioned from Hannah Kujo, Mabel Badavdankwa, and all the professors that we have, Mansa Pra, Prof herself, a lot of people. So it's dangerous for you to have this assumption that people haven't done this work, and that you can't find the information. It is there. Google.
Yes, Google is our friend. And I'll just to sort of clarify my point, if it's fair. So I think that there's a way in which, again, like our movements have been quite separate. And so, yes, I can Google and find certain information. I'm an academic myself. So when it comes to academic feminism, absolutely, right? But the history of Ghanaian feminism, even the state of where Ghanaian feminism is today, where those older pioneering generation feminists are today, I feel that there's still a sort of disconnect. And I don't know that it's necessarily just because we aren't looking. I think that there's also something about the kinds of spaces that exist for quote-unquote pioneering feminist activism that perhaps aren't always as open to younger generation feminists.
My observation, particularly from the conversations we've had through the evening, is that there is some struggle with the way the new group of feminists have been formed. For those of us who are being referred to as the bridge group, we got the benefit of people deliberately mobilizing us and giving us trainings and giving us training. I mean, we spent times in residential workshops organized by the ACT Foundation. We had All the women speaking here this morning were part of our trainings, and they exposed us to the history, they taught us the mobilizing strategies. There was so much work that was done with us that the responsibility was not all on us to go find them and liaise with them. They reached out. Maybe the pioneers did a lot more work than the bridging generation is doing. And this is an opportunity for all of us to tune in and say what can be done. That I think, and then I think the new generation should not be satisfied with the visibility that they are getting, because that will be exhausted at a point. The social media conversation would end, and then what next? Have we achieved our aim? So whilst the iron is getting hot, we should be getting ready to strike. Where do we strike, and how do we strike? This is an opportunity that has been created, and I think it's a great one, and we shouldn't have just conversations and leave, but then how do we work around identifying? And then we think the Pioneer Group, even though they may feel tired, and they don't look tired, should continue to support. So continue to support the kind of trainings we had back then, very, very thorough. Very thorough. You came out feeling very good and very strengthened. I remember after our training, I went for a workshop. Then it had nothing to do with gender and women. I think it was a meeting for GAPVOD, or it was an organization mobilizing around NGO work. And as soon as everybody was introducing themselves and their organization, when I stood up, I said, my name is Diana Bodo, I'm a feminist. And everybody was shocked, because I had just come from some new realization, and I felt finally there was a definition and identity to what I felt. And I began to tell everybody. What happened at coffee break? An elderly senior woman called me and said, today, how did you introduce yourself? I said, I'm a feminist. It's like, do you understand what that means? I said, yes. What does it mean? I went through all the theories and practicals of it. And she said, do you know feminists are not liked in the world around? I said, is that so? But are there more feminists in the world? She said, there are. And I said, has anything happened to them? She said, they are not liked. And I said, well, that is not a disincentive enough. I would like to be a feminist. And I continued, but strangely, as I grew older, before I realized, I began to call myself a gender activist. But today, and for the whole year, I have gone back to my initial identity. I am a feminist.
So would you say then it's easier in a sense to find examples of academic feminism versus on the ground, like the woman who would protect her child from her husband who wants her child to get married at the age of 12, but has not been documented in any of our literature. And when they were teaching me the independent struggle in social studies class in class 6, they mentioned the big 6, they never mentioned any women, So, I mean, would you say it's easier to find that kind of feminist history and that the everyday acts of feminism, which is on the ground, which is not as elitist or as classist, but is still feminism, is actually the ground and basis for it, is more difficult to find and to give praiseworthy notice to? Anyone can take this.
Well, I mean, I think that in terms of, who you're referring to, as in that woman with a daughter who perhaps wants to train the daughter in a feminist way. I mean, I'm not sure about how relevant academic knowledge would be to, such cause. And I think that's why activists and, academics need to work together. So then as an activist, you are informed by academic research, in advocacy and, all the wonderful jobs that, the professors have done. And then as we, as activists, as we go to the communities, then we can articulate in the languages that those people can understand. So I'm not sure whether access to academic information or feminist, discourse or academic discourse is very important to, let's say, the day-to-day person who intends to source that, knowledge. So I think different people, maybe for us, for some of us, we need to be able to, get schooled and educated in feminist, discourses. But as to whether that same end needs to be met for, the ordinary person, I think perhaps, a different access route to sourcing that knowledge should be explored.
Do you need academic feminism to be a feminist?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
And I'm coming from a place where I work on a daily basis on certain issues that doesn't necessarily get rooted in the academics. And so it may be a shame that we may not have the historical understanding of, say, African feminists. I don't think I even have much understanding of non-African feminists, but I think the importance is what you use academics to, what do you use that academic for, academic information to what end? And for me, academic information or research or data helps me sell my story. And that's really what it's about. And I don't think academics should stand alone as a solution in itself. Academics should be used as some sort of catalyst to arrive at the goal that you're trying to reach. And so, so I don't really understand the need for a feminist to have, well, it's great, as again, it backs your selling of your issue, but I think this theory that you must have a deep-rooted understanding in, or some sort of academic backgrounds to have this fight, I think is quite flawed.
Going back to your question, Going back to your question about whether whether it was easy to spot an intellectual feminist. Yes, it's an issue of looking, and it's also an issue of getting bogged down in labels, which I love labels, and semantics. I mean, it's not possible for Ghanaian women to have made it this far without some feminist leanings across all our families. In my maternal family, we make very bad wives. Or we don't marry at all. Because nobody told me, this is how you cook for a man. No. And I'm talking about in the village, my grandmother never said. So, and what are market women, except women who have carried this economy, carried Ghana and their family. So we have to make sure we see, because if we don't see, then we will not be inclusive. It's very, very important. It's very important that we are not bogged down in just spotting certain kinds of things and ignoring how Ghanaian women have been, navigating Ghana and patriarchy all this time. So it's very easy for me to spot. So you have to this is an issue of, I come back to centering. You have to center. This is not a foreign concept. A lot of the things, in Fanti, there's a saying, Isro awarugwa inya aware papa. But people are sitting on social media saying divorce is taboo. I don't understand that. So it's an issue of centering and seeing and looking, and the fact that the conversations we have about Ghanaian women and where they are now must catch up to the reality of the lives that they are living. There's like a gap. When that other group, what are they called? Those that will remain nameless. When they listed the things they were going to do to men and for men, I couldn't identify a single Ghanaian woman I knew who fits that description. And I'm talking about my entire family. Some of them are in 5 villages. I couldn't identify. They licked them, the what. I don't know who these people are. So we have to make sure that as feminists, or those of us who also believe in theory, that the conversation catches up. And it is very important because, again, going back to the pace setters, the pace setters are good at helping you bridge the gap.
So I think you need both. You need both the academics as well as the activists. And I think that it's also, about time that we started documenting people's experiences. Okay? I know, for instance, for me, I grew up with my grandparents as well. And my grandmother, there were 2 of us, 3 of us, 2 boys and myself. When I was being taught how to cook, my brothers were also being taught how to cook. She would share house chores, go to the boys and the girls. Apart from us, there were other people who were always living with her. So for me, I grew up also knowing that you could do anything. There were no limits. My aunties, etc., everybody could study any course they wanted, and this pressure about marriage wasn't an issue for me. Okay, so I think that there are other people too with such experiences. It's about time that we document it. And maybe some of the younger generation should be listening more to some of the older generation and start documenting. Because we have feminists, like I said, as far back, because my grandmother's grandmother herself was educated, and therefore there was this whole line of very liberated women. Yes, she married a Presbyterian minister, so maybe she got toned down a little bit, but she allowed, there were no limits, there were no barriers as far as I was concerned. So I think that we really need to document things. And then thinking about knowledge is also very important, because I'm sure that there's some people here who may not have had higher studies and therefore don't know much about the different categories of feminism that we have, the radical ones, etc., etc. So the knowledge about what feminism is all about is also very important. So it's very important for people to equip themselves with enough information so that when they are having dialogues, they know what they're talking about.
All right, so I want to jump into another leg of this conversation of bridging the gap in the feminist movement. What has been the Ghanaian feminist language when it comes to LGBTQI plus women in the older generation and in the current generation? What have we done about those issues? Anyone can take it.
Well, I don't know if I have the answer for that, but I'll take it from my own personal experience. I grew up in a very liberal family, and I use liberal in a very liberal sense. I'm also a Fanti. I grew up in as you know, Fanti women can be quite, there in terms of opinionated, and they rule their households. I think it was Professor Akosia who alluded to the CPP movement and how these women were able to, get their voices heard, and even some became, ministers and members of parliament. And I grew up with that, message in my household, because one of my great aunts was, one of these women who became one of the first women MPs in Ghana. So I grew up with this sense of women in my family always achieving, and I never really understood that there were barriers for women. And so I left Ghana at a very early age. I was maybe 10, and I recently came back several years back. I went through a liberal arts education. I was a gay rights activist. I understood the nuances of sexuality to the extent that Ghanaians didn't. And I really struggled with understanding at a very, in my early 20s, you may think I'm still in my 20s, I'm 36. Even in my early 20s, I really didn't understand what the issues were. For me, if one person loved another person, or one person felt a certain way, whether you felt it was natural or not, for me, there was no issue, because if it's an issue of consenting adults, then consenting adults can pretty much do what they like. So I grew up with that understanding, and again, I was in a liberal arts setting in the U.S. where these issues were constantly discussed and debated. And through that period as well, I also became religiously liberated, in the sense that I started to question the underpinnings of my life in terms of my religious understanding, right? I don't think, like I said, in my family, it was never a matter of you have to go to church or you have to believe in certain things, but I always felt that, being a person who always questions things, I always felt that it was incumbent on me to seek more information as to why I believe what I believe. And so I took that journey, and I came out the other side thinking, well, I don't think I can call myself a Christian, because I truly do not believe this information that I've been given. So coming back to Ghana with that load of not holding these values or these religious values that everybody expected of you to hold, knowing that my family really could care less what I believed. Also understanding that I knew that sexuality was so nuanced and that there wasn't any clear-cut understanding. One of my aunts is a plastic surgeon, and I think she is even helped me understand that issue even further. I asked her, what do you think about this whole gay thing? Are people really born? As a doctor, can you tell me if people are really born homosexual? And she says, well, I can tell you from my experience that I've helped bring babies into this world that are sexually ambiguous. And that formed her understanding of sexuality, and that conversation also helped me form my understanding. So I struggle in this society, especially when we talk about these not only religion, but also when we talk about sexuality, because I feel like we're miles behind, and I'm so glad you asked that question.
So yeah, I mean, what are we doing? What's a feminist movement? You hear stories. Last 3-4 weeks, we heard about a gay man who was lured and beaten up, and this is so common. Like every other week, you hear those stories, but then people are afraid to touch that. What have feminists done in the past? What are feminists doing today?
My observation of how feminists have reacted to this subject, the LGBT issue, has been that it's been very difficult, like political leadership, unlike the religious, the Christian environment that have made their position clear, like political leadership. I don't think, and I may be wrong, my observation may be wrong, but I don't think the feminist movement have said outright that we support these groups of people. But what the movement I have observed has done have made statements and supported in the pursuit of their rights as human beings. So women who were in same-sex women who were in relationships who were suffering abuse could get help from all the NGOs and the feminist groups that existed who were supporting any woman in a relationship who was struggling. They've talked about the rights of these people to their tenancy rights and everything else. So in as much as there has not been an open declaration of the Ghana feminist movement on what we stand for when it comes to LGBT, there has been that support. It may be nuanced, it may be hidden, but that position on issues of rights, on issues of prevention of violation and discrimination to them because of what they believe in has been clear from the feminists, at least to lesbians. So that is my observation. The new generation will step it a notch up. I suspect that will be a struggle to reach a consensus, and I'm being frank, because of the positions we hold coming from our religious and cultural beliefs. The same sources that we are struggling to liberate women from are the same sources that are feeding into our reaction to LGBT community. However, it looks like the feminism movement is ahead, so the issues are more visible, a lot more tolerated than that of the LGBT. But I don't think the feminist movement have turned their back on that particular community in Ghana.
I think we're
avoiding it.
Yeah, I think we're completely avoiding LGBT issues in the feminist movement in Ghana. And I agree with you that it's absolutely a very controversial topic, right? And so there are feminists who are very religious who feel that, maybe it's against their religion, and so they don't know how to deal with it, right? But for me, I feel that LGBT activism and feminist activism, I think they're natural allies, because for me, what queer activism does is that it challenges our understanding of gender. It challenges our understanding of sexuality, right? This is what feminism is doing, right? We are natural allies. So for the life of me, I don't understand why we don't, even on an intellectual level, understand that these movements are connected, right? There are lots of LGBT women within the feminist movement. Unfortunately, they're not able to be open, they're not able to be out, right? Because of the homophobia that exists. So yeah, I'd say that we're definitely not doing enough, and we're not having enough of the conversations. Kina.
I second what she's saying. I often wonder why the differences exist between, say, Kenya and Ghana. I ponder about it a lot. My godfather was gay, he was Kenyan. Yeah. So, and we are not doing enough. And the worrying thing is, I don't think that the younger generation of feminists are embracing enough publicly. What do we have to fear? Just some backlash. Are we not used to backlash?
It's more than that when it comes to
what is the
LGBT.
point of being an ally?
Death threats.
Are we going to advocate for certain groups of women and leave other groups of women? I don't understand. It's just some backlash. That's all. Nobody died from backlash. But gay people and lesbian women are dying in Ghana because of the sexuality choices they have made. We're not dying. So somebody is going to say you support gay rights, and then they're going to tell you it's un-African. Well, so what? So no, we have to be braver than this, because then we create classes for ourselves. This one is deserving of your support. Frankly, I support trans women, because the way I see it, if trans women exist, I am free. And I want to be free from the patriarchy. So if trans women exist, I am free. If Ghanaian women are allowed to say, I don't want to have a child, I am free. So if we, those of us who are a bit more privileged and have platforms, are going to be scared to just open our mouth and support people, and don't allow yourself to get bogged down in whether it's natural or not. Who the hell knows what natural is? We use cell phones. Then we are, and it's me, dear, it bothers me. My feminist struggle is how exclusive we are. I mean, we haven't even come to the class issues. So we are just going to have to do a whole better thing at being feminist, because I don't want other classes of women, because then I'm not free. Because what somebody is saying is that a Ghanaian woman doesn't have the right to be lesbian. And what we are saying is that women are entitled to their choices. So if somebody's path is blocked, my path is blocked. That's all.
I am going to attempt to sort of analyze, the focus, sort of the sites for advocacy. I mean, if you take Dem Ministries, for instance, we have identified the areas that we would like to focus on. So, sexual abuse and then all of that. In advocating for those, because there are women who are trans, let's say LGBT, we can, yes, Q. Plus, the list is endless. In your analysis to sort of advocate for the issues, there can be that inclusivity. But as to whether your focus of advocacy is to advocate that women, for those rights as a sole purpose, I think there has to be some distinction between that. Because every organization has a focus. So that ACT Foundation has one, WILDAF, all of that. But in our bid to advocate, we should have all the indicators sort of drill down to the various sort of, I think there is a word for it, drill down to the different parts of the people who we advocating for. So then, in terms of gender rights, or let's say women's rights, right, focusing on women, there are women who are trans, there are women who are this, there are women who are that. And so we can factor that in. But as to whether your focus is necessarily, advocating that, such women should exist or not exist, or the debate about is it natural or not natural, I think there has to be a distinction around that. And I hope I didn't run into complications with that. I hope I'm very clear.
No, so I think where the issue lies, and from my standpoint, is, when you are met with, I'm not saying you as in when we as feminists in Ghana are met with homophobia, we don't fight back as vigorously as we do when we're met with patriarchal issues. So I think that's really where the issue lies. And to be honest, there's also an element of homophobia in feminist movements in Ghana, and I think that's also something that has been conveniently avoided to make peace with the fact that that's also another civil rights effort or human rights effort. So I think that's really.
To say is that you are entitled to your position, but listening to you, it's like how the men go, well, we can speak for the women. We don't think we need a women's movement. We will advocate for them. The issues that we deal with also affect Ghanaian women. No. If we don't see people, we don't see their issues. So I'm begging you. It's not something you have to take on, no. I'm just saying. But if we continue to say the things that we advocate for touches the lives of gay people, queer people, then that's okay. No, because they suffer an added level, the whole intersectional thing. They have something. And what I'm trying to impress, and this can be a longer conversation, is that we've done that for so long. And when we do that in Ghana, it benefits the status quo, which is just horrible. And again, no, it's about women's choices. So that's what I'm saying. Can be a longer conversation.
This can go on, but yeah, thank you very much for your answers. We don't have much time, so I'm going to just kind of wrap this up with these two questions. There was this powerful image in the Pacesetters panel discussion where I think it was, I know Yelitha spoke about how they were at a rally and Auntie Dorcas actually told her to move inside to protect her. What does that say then about today, about support systems? How are we going to create support systems for the older generation? How is the older generation who's already gone through some of these things, some of the things that we are fighting today, we haven't gone through because they've done it for us. So how are they also going to create support systems for us? Them holding this here today has just been powerful. In a sense, it is a support system here with all these feminists sitting here today. But bridging that gap, like how are we going to create concrete support systems for feminists? We see how Dem is slammed. We see how they slam Ebony, how they slam Rashida Black Beauty, and you see traditional media on social media. And it's not everyone who can go through that and come out the same. So how do we create support systems?
Platforms to share. Today's program, for instance, is an example of where we are all here together sharing. So, and then build actual linkages in terms of how we can move some of the issues that are brought up to another level, whether to the policy level or whatever. So I think that we should come up with more creative ways, coming up with more platforms to talk, to dialogue, and to identify issues we can work on together.
So in my line of work, I founded an organization that looks to increase the number of women in boardrooms across the African region. Now, this was founded about 2 years ago, and we've so far built a database of nearly 300 women across the continent, really senior level. And so I think what's always missing is when we're talking about women empowerment, we also think that women who've reached like CEO or C-suite are not empowered in some way. There are lots of structures at the top that also prevent women from progressing and even getting to the board level. The figure is 5% of all the board CEO seats across the continent. Only 5% are held by women. The figure is, of all the board seats across the continent, only 14% are held by women. So there's an issue not just at the bottom, but there's also an issue with the pipeline and building your way up. And so in terms of how we bring women together and sort of be our sisters keepers, so to speak, our platform is engaged in getting these women to communicate with each other. I mean, this week alone, I've had conversations with women in Egypt, Morocco, and every time we talk about what we do, the resounding theme that we hear is, oh my gosh, you're bringing together women across the continent. We have tried to do this within our own setting, and it's great. We support each other at that senior level within our own context, but it's an amazing thing that we can come together as women across the African region and learn from each other's experiences and learn from each other's career goals. So from my perspective, that's what I think there should be more of. I think there's a lot of support systems that are building up for women who may be poverty stricken or may require some assistance from an angle where they're not empowered economically. But I think there's very little support for women at the top. Even when we started doing this, and every time we went to a social impact investor to consider the work we're doing to fund it, almost always we heard we only support poor women in Africa. And that was really tough. I mean, every single entity, you name it, Ford Foundation, Gates, all these, we only support poor women in Africa. And I said, well, you think women who have jobs don't need empowerment? So these are some of the narratives, and as we talk about intersectionalities as well, these are some of the narratives that I think, as feminist movement, we also have to understand the broad spectrum of women, and that, just because you think you sit in an office with a nice suit doesn't mean that there are structures within that context that are keeping you from reaching your apex.
You know what? Can I open it up to the audience now? But we'll come round for a final point of view on everything before we go. So you definitely have a chance to address anything else.
My name is Nanaya, and I belong to the Bridge group, and went through nonetheless a human rights training program, which was extremely helpful for me as a person at the stage of life I was in. I'm saying this because I think that every age has its strategy. At the moment, social media is achieving huge success. In fact, I got to hear about Dem on social media and found them, reached out to them, and it's making a lot of impact. I don't think as a bridge in terms of the old group and the new group, or in terms of the pacesetters and the new group, we should worry too much about whether we are reaching out enough or not. The fact of the matter is, at this time in our history, this is what we need. They say in the Bible about Esther, a time like this. This is why Dem was created, to make the impact they need. And I see a lot of young women here. I think the most important lesson I learned about 20 years ago was the fact that we need to live it as human beings. Feminism has to be lived. It has to change your life personally. And the thing about feminism and the support groups is sometimes you might be sinking. All you need is somebody to show you the spots. And it can change your life. It has changed mine.
Thank you. I think there's a question over here, please. There's a question here.
My name is Maoli, and just to touch on the issue of the disconnects that we talked about in the various panels, and to share my own experience on that feminist journey. I've had the privilege to sit in some really good classrooms, conferences, workshops, but some of the most important things I've learned that continue to help me as an activist in the feminist space were not in these kinds of settings. I remember when I was younger, Auntie Techuan from Techuan, used to organize these lunch that turns to dinner at her house. And I was very young, I didn't know much about feminism and all that, but usually they would invite me. And I didn't understand most of what they were saying, but I found it interesting. Years later, I was sitting in a law school at Columbia gender justice class, and some of those issues were coming up. And I remember some of the things they said, and I was really like, wow, you are very smart. The point I'm making is that we need to go beyond some of these International Women's Day, British Council, hotel, conference room meetings and explore other venues and spaces. Because if you are sitting at the table with some of the speakers that we've had, the pace setters, the kind of conversations that happen in those settings, you are not going to hear it with the media and the microphones here. So let's explore. Let's give ourselves the chance to learn. I engaged with some of the new feminist groups, and they are thinking of starting things that have been in existence instead of building on things that are already in existence, probably because they don't know about them. So you also have to invest in understanding the context and the history and things that are happening so that you are building on some of those things instead of re-engineering. So just to encourage us to try to fix that disconnect between the various generations. And it should be a shared responsibility.
Thank you. Question here? There's a question here.
I think it's already great that we've been able to gather here as women to discuss issues that concern us. But I feel like once we're here, let's deal with the things we are trying to avoid, or we're trying to keep away in some nice place. I've noticed that the older generation, the pace setters, call themselves women empowerment activists or something like that. And then we touch on specific issues. We're talking about...
No, they call themselves feminists.
Feminists? Yeah. Oh, great. Yeah, so activists and feminists is fine. So, but we touch on certain issues, girl child education, those, the ones we're used to. And then when it comes to the abortion rights, I saw Akusa try to mention about Ebony's lifestyle and such like that. We try to go away from that because we have certain views that contradict what the new school is trying to get across. So since we're here, can we address some of these issues? What are we ready to do from here? Rather than keep having these conversations over and over, we can do that. But what are we willing to do? We have ministers of state making rather interesting comments about rape and about women outfits and such. What are we going to do about it? Can we stop talking and actually do something now? Thank you.
Thank you, Ramatu. And well, I believe we've spoken a lot, and it's all boiled down to women. But I believe sometimes when you train a mind to think a certain way, it's better than when you want to change that mindset. Okay, what I'm trying to say is we create these things for people to fit in, whereas let's take it for, you want more women in boardrooms, you create that atmosphere for them, but they're afraid to step in there because that mindset is still there, that they have that fear holding them back. So how do we build up such mindset from infancy? You tell a child, you are not supposed to do this, it stays. Unless that child has something way bigger than him to fight that whatever he or she feels he has been told is wrong. So why not get down to the grassroots? Why not build up mindset? I don't see people coming to, I'm a teacher actually, I don't see people coming to the classrooms, especially government schools and all that, talking to them. We don't have things in our curriculum teaching these children what to hold, what to believe, what to see, what they can do. And then when they grow up, they come to this and then they are stuck. So if we can address that, I think it will help us also.
All right. So panelists, you've got a big job on you, and all of you have to answer. I'll start from Kina, we'll end this. People want to know, give us concrete solutions, movement building, education, what are we going to do to solve all the various problems feminism tries to solve while being intersectional, you know, religious hegemony, LGBTQI, all of these things.
Well, in the previous panel, in fact, Akosi and I were talking about one of the differences being, and I think Efia brought a question about achievements and things like that. So sooner or later, younger feminists are going to confront the issue of power. How to bring it down, the power that is not in your favor, and how to get the power. Because it is not all going to be about, we're not going to change the lives of the majority of Ghanaian women making personal choices, which are very important. So sooner or later, we hope sooner, we are going to have to talk about organizing, and this is what the pace setters had. There's lots of documentations about that. So sooner or later, you are going to have to confront power, because every personal choice that you make, there's a barrier to that somewhere. And it has to do with power. Because everything about Ghana right now is about giving the maximum power to men everywhere. So we are not going to get over without talking about power. And I think that, and once we start to look at power and we start to be inclusive, then we are going to broaden things out a bit. It's a worry really that we shouldn't be exclusionist. We should be inclusive. And I like the teacher, because that is, for me, I always say that I envy political parties in Ghana and churches, because they can get to Ghanaians wherever they are. And that's where I think feminism should be. So maybe we need to hire some political party organizers and say, here, today, go to here, and then go here, and then say this. Because we need to be in that classroom. Because we need to be there. And we need to also look at textbooks from a feminist angle, because what is in the textbooks is atrocious and anti-women, anti-Ghana. So I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that we are going to have to look at power and some, I don't want to say real issues, because the issues are real, but other issues that are plaguing Ghanaian women, like property rights, access to land, workplace harassment, equal pay, and poverty.
So the question is around...
So we want, basically, just wrapping it up, what's your idea of a feminist future? And everyone keeps asking for concrete solutions. What should we do?
Okay.
So yeah.
Okay, that's a big question to answer in 30 seconds. But I think I'll just take this time to plug YFG. So I'm part of a...
I've been told to tell you it's all 30 seconds each.
Okay, I'll be quick. So I'm part of a feminist collective called the Young Feminist Gathering. We meet once a month at the AWDF house. Come check us out. That's where we're working on building different futures, thinking about feminist futures for young women and for all of Ghanaians. Thank you.
Power. It's a great support system.
All right. What we should do, first, I want to applaud the Dem Ministries. My main point is don't give up. The backlash. You survived the first phase, that heavy one. You're going to survive so many more. The numbers are going to grow. Lots more young people are going to identify as feminists, much more than the bridging. We are the Honey Hawk group. The Honey Hawk group did our best, but it looks like you people are doing better. Don't give up at all, but most importantly, our seniors, the pace setters, old school, whatever name you give them, I'm not sure they mind. They have demonstrated their commitment to this process by being here. All of them who don't have other... Thank you. Thank you for clapping for them. They are here. You know their ages, you know how long they've done this. Some of them have done this longer than our age. But they're here today, so don't feel tired on their behalf. Don't let them take a break.
Be in touch with them and let them show the way. You know, the way Pepe Dems arrived, it shook the ground. People have criticized the fact that you entered through the wrong door. It doesn't matter, you are in the hall anyway. I think how we can get better is to be strategic, and you can do that only by talking to those who went through the experience already. So be in touch with them. They are willing. They are mothers, they are aunties, they are friends, they are there, and most of them are retired, you know, so it makes it even better. So visit them in their homes, out of the face of the camera, and let us get strategy. I have said that the social media strategy looks good, but it will get exhausted. Before then, let us be combat ready. This battle is on, and it's on for life.
Thank you.
So, in terms of solutions, and I'm going to be very politically controversial. So, our president is supposedly the AU gender champion. Okay. So, of all the political appointments that he can make himself, why are women not 50-50? That's one. Secondly, why don't we have a bill out in Parliament that sets a quota for the number of women represented in Parliament? That's two. Thirdly, he set up an organization called JDIA as on the back of his appointment as AU Gender Champion. There was a recent event to launch JDIA where pretty much an award was provided to a bunch of businessmen, and there was no woman given an award. I mean, and nothing was said. I mean, nobody made a point that this was just atrocious and it's ridiculous. And I know I'm going to get flack for this, but it's wrong. Don't claim to set up a gender movement if you're not even going to consider the very basis of that, of the underpinnings of why you're doing what you're doing. And these awards were also supposedly given to men who were advancing gender in business. I can guarantee you that none of them on the list were advancing gender in business. So for me, those are real concrete steps that are easily done because the president has the bully pulpit. He has the power to make a difference, and there's a claim to being a feminist, or there's a claim to championing the cause of women, and if that's the claim, we need to take it on board. I mean, Rwanda has 60% women in parliament. South Africa is stepping up in terms of women's leadership and representation. Kenya has similar quotas. What is Ghana doing? You're the gender champion. Do something. That's my solution.
I think that the fight for gender equality has been there for a while, and it will continue on. We all work in different spheres. On the issue she's talking about, I think some of us in this room have worked towards putting together an affirmative action bill, and I'm hoping that it will soon be in Parliament, and we should all continue to support it. It's a very positive one. So my message is that we work in different spheres. The academicians are there, they are doing their work, they should continue doing it and pushing the theories when it comes to feminism. The activists are there. Somebody asked about people going to the villages. I think that when I joined FIDA in 1989, they were crossing, using canoes to go to places to do legal literacy, etc. They gathered information to push for the law to ban trocosi. A lot of work has gone on. The issue of abortion came up. Originally in our criminal law, abortion was sort of a no-no. With advocacy and work on policy that was done, the law was changed to make it possible to have an abortion under 3 different circumstances. I don't know, I know that we don't have time, so we can't go into that. So there's a lot of work going on. Those who are working on policy should continue. And then the younger ones, as has been indicated, let's try to build bridges. Apart from such formal settings, you can also meet in smaller groups to learn more about what has gone on, what can be done, and how those of us in the older generation can help you to push some of the thoughts and ideas you have forward. Thank you.
I think that I just want to, sort of vision cast, so what next? And with that, I would say that we need to step back and ask ourselves the question, how far are we willing to go to bring transformation? To what extent, can we bring transformation? And if we can measure or sort of cast our mind to the kind of transformation that we wish to effect in the society, then we would be able to amass, sort of, I don't want to use missiles, but, put together the tools that would be needed to implement that. And I think the church is very important. It speaks to a certain human motivation for people to do things. The kind of things that people get to do when told by, preachers or in the church space. People can go to a very, whatever extent. So I think that in exploring new ways to sort of build coalitions and effect advocacy and all that, we should look at the church, because it looks to me that it's sort of a prime influence in the Guinean life.
Alrighty, so that's it, ladies and gentlemen, your panel. Huge round of applause for them. Thank you.